Alright, hello everybody, this is Thersites the Historian. Tonight we're doing Winter Battles Part 2. We'll be looking at 4 more battles that were fought in wintry conditions, which have had some impact on the course of history. Tonight, I will be the one presenting, Sean will be along later. And we have 4 battles before us tonight. We have the Battle on the Ice from 1242. We have the first Mongol invasion of Japan from 1274. We have the Battle on Snowshoes from 1758. And the most recent battle that we have is the 4th Battle of Shipka Pass from 1878. So, question is, where should we start? So, since it's just us for now, I'll allow you guys to decide. If you have a preference, type it in. Or better yet, express your preference in the form of a super chat, so that way I'll know what order you guys want to go in. Alright guys, let's keep it going, yeah, woohoo. Sunday night, 1242. Alright, might as well start with 1242. Actually, interestingly enough, I read for these in reverse chronological order, which I don't know exactly why I did it that way, but figured it would be fun. Anyway, so let's talk about the Battle on the Ice from 1242. We'll just do that. Alright. So I'm going to bring up a few images that will hopefully be useful. Alexander Nevsky is a major player here. Oh, here's a nice dramatization. As you can see, he's a bit of a big deal in certain parts of the world. The Teutonic Knights. Here we go, this looks about right for what we're talking about. Especially charging through the snow like that. Perfect. And how about another representative image? Let's just get a map of Novgorod. I think that would be useful. Novgorod Republic, even better, since this is really what we're talking about. And where's it at? Okay, so this is a little afterwards, so but still basically the right area. This map will be the one we go with. I think this is the most useful. And let's also pull up the Golden Horde. There we go. Let's give you a scale of what these guys were dealing with. And look, here's Novgorod, one of the stars of our little thing today. So, we'll start out by looking at the context of Novgorod, which I think I just almost buried. So Novgorod is a part of northwest Russia, and it, by the 13th century, had emerged as something like an independent republic. It had been part of the larger Kievan Rus world, and the overall leaders of the Rus world would elect the princes of various cities. Novgorod, due to its position in the north and all of its trade links, became an important and prosperous center. It was, as I said, relatively wealthy, and there was a large mercantile class in the city. So while it did have a prince, the local elites also had a lot of power, and that's why some people call it the Republic of Novgorod. The main industry there was probably fur trading, although it did business in all kinds of different markets, and it was also a military power by this point, as it was sort of the major center in this part of Rus territory. So anytime there was a Swedish or a Teutonic invasion, the Novgorodians would be the front line. As for Alexander Nevsky, the celebrated man who gets treated romantically, he was the Prince of Novgorod at this time. He was born in 1219, and he would live until 1263, so he only lived to be in his early 40s, and yet, as we'll see, at this time when he's in his early 20s, he is winning undying renown. Nevsky is not a family name, by the way. During this period, the Rus were under attack in both the north and the south in unrelated affairs. So in the north, we have the Northern Crusades, which consist mostly of the Swedes and Teutonic Knights. And then in the south, the Mongols have invaded. What will later become the Golden Horde will take over much of what is now southern Russia. So, in 1240, Prince Alexander won a battle over the Swedes at Neva, or maybe it's pronounced Neva, I'm not really sure. And after that, he took the name Nevsky to celebrate his great victory. So this is an honorific name in many ways. Now, at the same time in 1240, this is the same year that the Mongols overrun Kiev. So it's a pretty big year in Russian history. And some people object to the term Russia for this period, but let's not get too deep in the semantics. It doesn't really matter. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. So, the Teutonic Knights are the main opponents of Alexander Nevsky going into the battle on the ice. They actually had merged with a group called the Livonian Knights in 1237, and then in 1239 they began their invasion of northwest Russia, taking the city of Pskov, or Pskov, I don't know exactly how you say it, which is right here on the border. They took this city in 1241. Let's blow this up some. There we go. So obviously Novgorod under Nevsky was a little alarmed by this. This is an inroad that they don't want to have to deal with, especially as disturbing reports are coming up from the south about Kiev being occupied by the Mongols. Well, and also destroyed. That part of the story also probably caused some disturbance. So Nevsky's plan was to make peace with the Swedes after he crushed them at Neva. Then he got his men together and marched out to try to retake Pskov. He ended up meeting in battle against the knights at a place that doesn't really have a name, but it's somewhere near Lake Peipus, also known as Lake Chud. And I'm not sure exactly where that's at on the map. Let's see. Yeah, northern Russian geography is not my strong suit. Okay, so this is basically on the border then. Okay, so that would be the equivalent of this lake. So he's going out this frontier to confront the invaders. They meet near the lake. And you might look at the date of the battle and say, that can't be a winter battle. It's fought on April 5th. That's technically spring. Well, this is Russia. Or pre-Russia, or however pedantic you want to get with it. And it's cold as fuck. So there is a lot of ice around, and this will play a big role in the battle. Some of the Russian chronicles, by the way, call it not the battle on the ice, but the massacre on the ice. So basically what happens is, here are the official numbers, and I'll talk about why these numbers are probably not accurate later on. Officially, Nevsky raises around 5,000 or so men, facing off against 2,600 or so German knights, with some number of Finns and Estonians and others involved as well. When it comes to the losses, according to our sources, no one says how many Novgorodians perished. One chronicle, the Livonian Rymead Chronicle, says that 20 knights were killed and 6 captured. And then the Novgorod First Chronicle says that 400 knights were killed and 50 were captured. And then there were countless Estonian deaths as well. So what actually happened at the battle? Well, the German knights, who were heavily armored, at least by the standards of the time, these were not the full plate armor suits that you see from the late Middle Ages. These would be more of the mail plate armor. Or not, I guess mail plate would be kind of an oxymoron, wouldn't it? I mean mail suit, there we go. Still pretty protective, but not quite as extensive or sort of aesthetically impressive as the plate armor from later. kind of stuff they like to show off at Renfest. So they got together with some of the Finnish knights, and they tried to strike at the Russian lines in a big block. However, while they did manage to push the Russians back to some extent, and Nevsky's line was sagging, his line held well enough for him to launch some of his other troops around their rear to create a panic, and then create a rout. And apparently what happened is that the routing knight army found itself trying to cross the ice. Some of them fell through, and others were captured or killed as they were trampled in the counterattack. And according to the sources, the spring ice breaking under the retreating forces also contributed to their destruction. It would have made the ground very difficult to pass. It's not just a problem for the Germans and Soviets fighting in the 1940s. The Russian winter is not kind to anyone. So yes, this battle was concluded. And just to put it in a little bit more of a realistic perspective so we see how badly beaten the knights actually were, one modern scholar estimates that for every listed knight on the knight side, or I guess you could call it the Northern Crusader, Catholic side, whatever you want to call it, that for each one of them there were probably 8 to 30 other men present fighting in various capacities. They just weren't counted because they weren't noblemen. But if you were to take the casualty figures and then multiply them by 8 to 30, maybe you get a better picture of the kind of disaster that this really was. Because a year later, they're willing to make peace with Nevsky, and effectively they renounce all claims to quote-unquote Russian lands, or Rus lands. And this in many ways helps to set up the borders which are still recognized between what is now Russia and what is now the Baltic. So this is actually a pretty historical and significant battle. Another thing to keep in mind is that this puts Nevsky in a much stronger position when he has to deal with the Khan of the Mongols. Now, he realizes that Novgorod, despite winning some pretty impressive battles over the years, can't possibly hope to fight the Mongols. So before the Mongols ever attack him or demand tribute, he visits them and submits. And this gives some favor to both him and then his family. So after he dies in 1263, the Khan of the Golden Horde, by this point the Mongol Empire has broken up. There is no more Great Khan. And the Golden Horde will largely promote various members of his family to be the Grand Prince of Novgorod. So after Nevsky's death in the Russian manner, his brothers both ruled in turn, and then his two sons, Dmitri and Andrew, ruled. After Andrew's death, one of his nephews, Michael, took over, but then he visited the Golden Horde court, where apparently one of Nevsky's grandsons, a man named Yuri, convinced the Khan that Michael needed to die and be replaced by himself. So the Nevsky family benefited immensely, and apparently most people in northern Russia felt that Nevsky made a wise decision by sparing them of the horrors of the Mongols. So one of the authors that I've read on Russia, who I think his name, he's got some Russian name, I can't remember it, but I've got his textbook, and that's what I was drawing on for this portion. And he was saying that that might be the main reason why Nevsky was canonized by the Orthodox Church, is because of his role in keeping the Mongols out of northern Russia. More so than his role in defeating the Swedes and Teutonic Knights. So, that is the story of the battle on the ice, or massacre on the ice if you prefer that. Alright. So is everybody here awake now? So I'll read a quick super chat from Diogenes. Hey y'all, appreciate the content and books. Would a stream on the fall of the Roman Republic be possible? Or even the French republics, considering Sean once said they and our republic share more. Going forward, we are thinking about doing something covering the Roman Republic. So that is definitely going to happen at some point. I just don't know precisely when. But that is the plan. Because I know Sean also wants to do some Roman Republic stuff. And I've also been thinking, because originally I was going to do 6 battles for the night, and 2 of them were sieges from the Peloponnesian War. I'm thinking maybe at some point we could even do a stream talking about the progression of the Peloponnesian War, maybe just cover each little segment of the war and do it in that fashion. Yeah. I'm not used to having to talk the whole time. It's kind of a strain, physically, I mean. Alright. So now I'm going to move on to talk about the first Mongol invasion of Japan, which is also a winter battle, or actually campaign. This was in the year 1274. Let's pull up some appropriate imagery for that. So, let's see. Kublai Khan with his pleasure dome. We need Tsushima Island. Okay, this looks pretty cool. Let's go with that image. We need Iki Island. Some terrible things happen here. Look how this just makes it look all peaceful. Because what we're going to talk about is not very peaceful. We need... see if there's an image of this. This will be sort of the main event. Okay, got a nice scroll here. And let's see if there is a thing for the Mongol invasion fleet itself. Okay. Oh, nice. Okay. So, I mentioned earlier that the Golden Horde was sort of a descendant of the overall Mongol Empire. That it broke up among the grandsons of Genghis Khan, and they each kind of went their own way. One of the grandsons of Genghis Khan, probably the most powerful single one of them, was Kublai Khan, who took over China and founded the Yuan dynasty. His reign was from 1260 to 1294, and this means that he oversaw both of the Mongol invasions of Japan, the one in 1274 that we'll be talking about, and the one in 1281, which we will not cover because it was in the middle of the summer. So, Kublai Khan effectively wanted his generals who were stationed in Korea to launch a large-scale invasion of Japan, which had largely defied Chinese authority throughout its entire history. No mainland power had ever really occupied and controlled Japan. Japan wasn't super important to the economic life of the mainland at this time, but it was kind of a matter of prestige to occupy this island, and it would have some trade value, and just in general be a cool thing to have this extra land in the empire. So on November 2nd, 1274, the Yuan forces left Korea and embarked on a journey to Japan. I'm mostly familiar with naval operations in the Mediterranean, where the ships are very top-heavy. I'm not as familiar with how the Pacific works when it comes to pre-modern shipping, but in general, it seems that it's always a bad idea to try to sail in the winter. But, what do I know? I guess these guys knew what they were doing and nothing bad will happen. On November 4th, they arrived in Japanese territory on an island to the west of the Japanese main island, or main islands, I guess I should say, Tsushima Island. This is a fairly small, peaceful island, as I said. And according to, I don't remember if it's the History of the Yuan, which is basically a Mongol source, or whether it is one of the local sources from Japan, But apparently this force that landed on Tsushima Island was not the full invasion force. It had about 8,000 men on 900 or so ships, which I actually don't think you need that many ships for 8,000 men, but let's not get into that. Against 80 or so samurai who lived on Tsushima Island under the local governor So Sukakuni. Luckily for the defenders, they were able to spot this incoming fleet and mobilize themselves. Of course, given the nature of the odds, that ultimately would not make much of a difference. Actually, here's a good island. A good map. You can see that actually Tsushima Island is pretty far out on its own, and you can kind of guess what happens in terms of the fate of the defenders here. The Japanese, under Sukakuni, asked to negotiate. The Mongols weren't interested. Why would they be? They had a massively overwhelming force. So what follows is basically a kind of romanticized account of Japanese heroism. The Mongols tried to land at 2 a.m., and the Japanese tried to meet them at the coast, but of course they just got overwhelmed by the number of arrows the Mongols put in the air. The fighting got underway, and everybody got to grips with one another around 4 a.m., and they went on to fight intermittently until nightfall, supposedly. One of the samurai engaged in this particular battle was named Sukasada, and he supposedly took down 25 men by himself. So he should be an unlockable character in one of the Samurai Warriors games, if he isn't already. Right before nightfall, the Japanese, under the governor, launched a last charge against the Mongols. I don't know exactly what the point was, unless it was sort of just a point of honor or to show defiance. Predictably enough, given the numbers, this did not succeed. Then they tried to fall back deeper into the island. Over the next few days, the Mongols would storm forth and lay waste the island, supposedly killed most of the locals. And then they, I believe, established a garrison, because the idea is to create a supply line. If you're trying to support yourself out of Korea and into Japan, what you need is a logistical chain until you establish control. And having control of this island is very advantageous. So it actually makes a lot of strategic sense. The battle I just described with the guy who killed 25 people, that was called the Battle of Komoda. Next up, they went to Iki Island. Let's see if there's a good map of where that's at. I want to say Iki Island is this one, but I don't know for sure. Is there a map? That doesn't help. Anyway, Iki Island is even closer to Japan. Let's put it that way. And it's also smaller from what I understand. So at Iki Island, the local governor, Kagataka, was a little stronger than the governor of the previous island because he had about 100 samurai, and just like his predecessor, he was aware of the arrival of the Mongols before they came, and he did his best to resist them. He was overwhelmed, however, as he only had 100 men, but he died heroically. He made one last sortie with about 36 of his surviving able-bodied men after a couple days of fighting, and in that attack 30 of his men fell. He was wounded, he retreated to be home with his family, and then they all committed suicide together rather than fall into Mongol hands. The people who really suffered the most in this battle were the local women of Iki Island, however, because the Mongols took them, killed them, and then took their bodies and nailed them, basically crucified them to the fronts of their ships. So as they're sailing to the Japanese mainland from Iki Island, their ships are covered in the bodies of dead Japanese women. Another notable incident from this particular battle is that one of the men was sent by the governor, Kagataka, with his daughter to get her to safety on the mainland. However, as they were fleeing in a small boat, or I assume smallish craft, they were pursued by one of the Mongol warships, and the ship fired on them with a bunch of arrows. So the samurai himself managed to make it, but the daughter of the governor was killed. So that's how news of the fall of Iki Island reached the mainland. And the upshot is that the mainland was ready for the Mongols, or at least thought they were ready, but as we'll see, maybe not so much. So, the Mongols land at Hakata Bay, which is on the main island of Kyushu, on November 19th. On November 20th, the Japanese formed an army and marched out to challenge the Mongols. This is the battle either of Bune, or it is sometimes called the First Battle of Hakata Bay. This is a somewhat confusing battle. The Japanese had their own ideas about how pitched battles should be conducted. Their battles are much more ritualistic and based on honor. There were formal challenges to individual combat, and they liked to give instructions using drum beats and flags. The Mongols thought that this was somewhat silly. They did things differently. And also the Mongols had more technology on their side than the Japanese did. Both sides did have some rudimentary muskets, however. But the Mongols certainly had more of them, and they also had some fairly rudimentary bombs. And the significance of the bombs, according to especially the Japanese sources, is that these made their horses a lot less effective because these bombs were scary to horses. And also, they claimed that it also spooked the men because they didn't know what it was. This was something unaccustomed to them. So it very much damaged the morale of the Japanese. So effectively what happens in this battle is that because bombs are going off every time they're about to close, and the Mongols aren't responding to the ritualized challenges for individual combat, the Japanese are kind of staying in place on their high ground defensive position, and the Mongols have the freedom to move around. I should also mention that the commanding general for the Yuan is a gentleman named Liu Fujiang. He also has two subordinate generals we'll get to later after they become relevant. So, General Liu is moving his men around to get them in position, and he's basically able to do so with impunity because the Japanese are dumbstruck by the weapons that are being presented to them. According to the sources, the odds at this battle are about even. It's about 3,000 on 3,000, but as I mentioned, the Mongols seem to be a little better at coordination, and also their weapons are demoralizing the Japanese. Eventually, when they get into place and they have a favorable position to attack the Japanese up on their hilltop, they strike, and what results is a battle where the Japanese lose about a third of their force, and they are routed from the field. So this was a pretty impressive victory. The Mongols pursue them and manage to burn the city of Hakata. It looks like things are going to get worse. The surviving Japanese forces retreat to the fortress at Mizuki. This is actually not a castle. It's sort of older than that. This is a fortification which was earthwork with a moat. It dates back to the 7th century. So this is before the Heian period of Japanese history. This is some really old stuff. And the 2,000 or so survivors are expecting to be pursued and destroyed. However, what they didn't know is that during the pursuit, one of the samurai had fired an arrow backwards and managed to hit General Liu in the face. So Liu is badly wounded, and he is becoming cautious. He thinks that if they pursue the Japanese, that they will get ambushed. And it's also possible that part of his thinking was influenced by the fact that when things broke down and it was relatively close to just 1-on-1 or 5-on-5, just these small unit actions, the Japanese were holding even. It's just in the large battles where the Mongols had the massive advantage. So he was very much against moving forward. He was also wounded, so he has a conference with two of his generals. One of them was named Hong Dagu. The other one, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it is spelled hold on. So probably hold on or something like that. But anyway, hold on. Just imagine it as one word. His position on this, are you ready for this, was that they need to stay the course. They need to hold on, if you will, and keep pressing the Japanese. They have them on the run. But General Liu would not hear of that because, well, he was wounded, and this wouldn't really give him much chance for glory. Why let General hold on and get all the glory? Let's hold on to our lives and go back to Korea. How about that? Hold on. Anyway, so the Japanese began to retreat, and it's unclear whether they were still off the coast of Japan near Hakata or whether they were nearing Korea. But at a certain point during their return journey, they were hit by a massive destructive storm, which is the origin of the Japanese idea of the kamikaze, the divine wind. The idea by the Japanese that due to all of the horrors perpetrated by the Mongols, this was divine retribution for their actions. And it was the gods standing up for the people of Japan. Interestingly enough, though, if the sources of this period and then sources such as Polybius are to be believed talking about the First Punic War, this storm is actually a lot less destructive than almost every storm in the First Punic War, in terms of the number of men who were killed and the percentage of men who were killed. So, of the men, the 30,000 or so men, meaning soldiers and sailors who set out from Korea in November, 13,500 died. So both in the storm and in operations in Japan. So this was a very costly failure, but the only reason it failed was not because of the storm. If it hadn't been for General Liu getting wounded, they would not have faced the storm. It was because General Liu got hit in the face, and he decided, alright, calling this off. And then General Hold On could not convince him to hold on and try to seek victory. So, there you go. If anything, the divine action here was the arrow that magically found its way to the commanding general's face. So that is the story of the first Mongol invasion of Japan. And then we'll have a big time jump as we get into the French and Indian War. I'm going to check my phone to see if Sean is anywhere close, because the French and Indian War is very much more in Sean's bag than in mine. Alright. Alright. So Sean will be with us in about 10 minutes, just for context. So I think what we'll do is actually save the battle on snowshoes until Sean is with us, since that is a war at least that he knows better than I do. And we will instead look at the fourth stage or fourth battle of Shipka Pass from 1878. So let us pull up the relevant images. Battle of Shipka Pass. Oh, this is a good picture. Pretty commanding territory here. Here's an image of the battle itself. I'll just type in the battle, fuck it, why not? Let's also bring up the Janissaries. This looks a little dated for that period, but you get the idea. And let's see if we can find the Russian commanding general here. He's a pretty big deal. What was his name? Where the fuck is this man? Gorko. There we go. I knew it had to be something like that. Vasily Gorko. Alright. This is, so that's the commander, the main Russian involved in this story. Alright. So, the general context is that by 1878, nationalist fervor has expanded from Western and Central Europe to the East. So in the Balkans, a lot of the various Slavic peoples are trying to rise up and assert their independence from the Ottomans. Naturally enough, as with any empire, the Ottomans are not too keen to grant their independence. This leads to conflict. Russia, for its part, is both Orthodox, which is in line with the religious beliefs of many people in the Balkans, and also anti-Turk. They also have a long-standing rivalry on the frontier with the Ottoman Turks, and they lost some territory to the Ottomans back in the Crimean War of the 1850s, and they're eager to retake that. So the Russians want to intervene on behalf of the Bulgarians and a few other nationalities, including the Romanians, the Serbians, and the Montenegrins. So there is a larger conflict here. This is usually referred to as the Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 78. I've also seen people call it the 12th Russo-Turkish War. Although at a certain point, if you keep numbering things up and up and up, it starts to become a little confusing and ridiculous. But suffice it to say that Russia and the Ottoman Empire were frequently at war. And during this time, Russia is mostly ascending, and the Ottomans are declining. The Ottoman army at this time still relies heavily on the Janissaries. But at this point, the Janissaries are no longer the feared elite corps of Suleiman the Magnificent. They have become somewhat antiquated, and also they assert themselves in politics a fair amount. They are a somewhat destabilizing force at times, and while they still have a great deal of loyalty and also fighting spirit, they aren't necessarily the most modern or efficient fighting force in the world. And we'll see that play out. In the battles we'll talk about, they fight very bravely, but not necessarily very skillfully. So, just to give you, I guess in history there aren't really any spoilers, the outcome of this conflict is that the Ottomans are reduced to a foothold around Constantinople or Istanbul, which is how things still stand to this day, and all of the countries seeking independence got it. So, Shipka Pass is a very important place, not just in Bulgarian history, but in European history more broadly. So, alright. Let's set the strategic stage. The main thrust that the Russians were making was not at Shipka Pass. They were mainly aiming first at a place in northern Bulgaria called Plevna. And the threat that Shipka Pass posed is that this was a place that an Ottoman army could cross and then hit the Russian army in the rear as it's trying to take the stronghold at Plevna. So the idea that the Russians had was that they wanted to seize this ground, fortify it with a small force, and have the rear secure while they advanced through northern Bulgaria and then into the south. So for them, Shipka Pass was the linchpin of their plan. The Ottomans also understood this, and they were equally determined first to hold it, then to capture it. So I won't cover the first 3 battles at Shipka Pass in much detail since they are not winter battles, but we still need to know them to know the overall context of the war and the importance of the 4th battle at Shipka Pass. So, in July of 1877, the Ottomans held this pass with a, I'd say, medium-sized force. Can't remember the exact numbers. It certainly outnumbered the Russian attacking force, but the Russians outmaneuvered the Turks and attacked from 2 sides. So the Ottoman commander decided to retreat lest he be cut off and destroyed. And that let Shipka Pass, one of the most formidable mountain passes in this region, fall into the hands of the Russians. After that, they began to dig in, but they did not put very many troops there. This is also at a time when local Bulgarian resistance fighters began to join the Russians and join the garrison at Shipka Pass. Phase 2, or the second battle, took place between August 21st and August 26th. At this point, the Russians had turned over a lot of the defense to the Bulgarians. 5,000 Bulgarians were there and 2,000 Russians, but the Ottomans were determined to retake the pass and then force the Russians to abandon Plevna. So they sent an army of 38,000 men under Suleiman Pasha. This was a hard-fought battle. And even though the Bulgarians and Russians held a commanding position, the Ottomans came very close to victory. They overran a few of the lines on the lower slopes before they were repulsed nearer to the summit. And at one point, the defenses were on the verge of complete collapse until the Bulgarians, who were running low on ammo, mounted their bayonets and launched a desperate and successful charge. Russian reinforcements arrived during this battle as well, which helped to stem the tide, but this was a very close-run thing. So although the Ottoman Empire very much was the sick man of Europe, and as I said, the Janissaries were kind of outdated in many ways, we shouldn't think this army was completely and totally broken. The Ottomans still had a lot of fight in them, and they could still mount a pretty credible assault. Phase 3 is in September, from the 13th to the 17th. The Russians kept digging in deeper at Shipka Pass, but they did not send many reinforcements because they were focused on Plevna, which at this point was under siege. The Ottomans, for their part, sent the bulk of their artillery to Shipka Pass, and they had a 4-day bombardment of the Russian and Bulgarian positions from September 13th to the 17th, and then after some bombardment on the 17th, the Ottomans launched a massive assault, once again under the command of Suleiman Pasha. They overran the first line, but then they were stopped at the summit. This was their main thrust. All the secondary thrust failed to even penetrate the first line. So this was a pretty heroic stand, but once again, this was very, very hard fought, and it was a close-run affair. Probably not quite as close or desperate as the second battle, but still pretty close, and one has to imagine pretty bloody. The Ottoman army will stay here. However, it will not attempt any further attacks, and the next time that they will fight, the fourth battle at Shipka Pass, won't take place until January. So the Ottoman force, you might think, is completely, to use a Civil War term, licked, but it's not quite, as we'll see. So, as time marches on, in December of 1877, the Russian General Gorka, or Gorko, I guess is probably closer, manages to capture Plevna, and he has a force of 65,000 men. So by far the largest army we've seen so far, and also a Russian army which is of higher quality than anything the Ottomans can muster at this point. His plan is to march around the flank of the army, which I assume is still under the command of Suleiman Pasha, although I do not know that for sure. His plan is to march around where the Ottomans are, and then capture them all. And he assumes this will be an easy battle once he gets there, because he assumes the Ottomans are completely beaten, that they're demoralized. So he crosses through a couple of passes to get in their rear. He occupies the city of Sofia, the modern-day capital of Bulgaria, without a fight. And then he divides his force into two under Generals Skobelev and Mirsky, and they are to attack in two columns from the rear. The idea is that they will surprise and overwhelm the Ottomans, but the Ottomans seem to be aware of their presence, even though they did not move out of the way. They did detect them before the battle started, and this would lead to heavy resistance. At the same time, the garrison commander, Radetsky, who was now in charge of the Russians at Shipka Pass, was going to make a frontal attack to coincide with the attacks to the rear. On January 8th, things did not go well for the Russians, however. Radetsky started on time, but the other two commanders were late. Skobelev was held up by heavy resistance, so he made barely any progress at all. And then his colleague Mirsky was able to make some progress, but because he didn't have support from the other column, he didn't penetrate very far. So on January 8th, the Ottomans had shown enough fight to really halt Russian momentum altogether, and keep in mind that they were outnumbered, probably 2-1 or so. And they're surrounded for all practical intents and purposes, yet they still have quite a bit of fight in them. On January 9th, however, Mirsky was counterattacked by the Russians, so he's held in position for a little while, but then Skobelev was able to punch through the forces in front of him, come to the relief of Mirsky, And at that point, the Ottomans were completely cut off, and the commanding general, who is now actually Visel Pasha, decided to surrender the same day. He didn't want his men to die for nothing, so a large force of Ottomans surrenders here. And for all practical intents and purposes, this very much ends the war. This was a major field army for the Ottomans, and its loss was devastating. So, this was a very historically important battle. The results of the battle are effectively confirmed at the Treaty of Berlin in 1878, which is more famous for the colonization deals that Bismarck worked out with his European colleagues, but also included a lot of stuff from this war, including some things that are fairly unrelated. The British took Cyprus, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the independence of Serbia, Montenegro, Bulgaria, and Romania was recognized. So, a lot of this owes to this one battle where the Ottoman army was crushed, and its predecessors, where, as you can see here, this guy with the rock, this is a reference to the fact that the defenders during either the second or third battle actually ran out of ammo and were forced to revert to throwing rocks. So, this battle got pretty desperate, and as you might imagine, this became the sort of national battle of Bulgaria. So this is the one that they celebrate. This is the moment of their independence, if you will. So that is the fourth battle of Shipka Pass, or according to Wikipedia, the fourth phase of the Battle of Shipka Pass. Although it's kind of weird to refer to it as a phase, given that there was a huge interruption and then the conditions at the battle changed pretty dramatically. Cool. So Sean will be on shortly, and when he gets here, we will put on some snowshoes. So yes, very important battle, and one that I actually only discovered as a result of the H.G. Wells reading for this week. Otherwise, I would have not known about this. He mentioned it in passing, I happened to look it up, and then I realized, hey, that's a great winter battle. So that's how this one ended up on the list. So, all right. Yeah, the Shipka anniversary is huge for Bulgaria. So I'm just going to hang out and wait for Sean at this point, because he'll be here in a minute. And also, I think I'm going to put up some images first. So, first of all, Robert Rogers. French and Indian War. Or, as it's known to you people in Europe, the 7 Years' War. And we'll be focusing mostly on this frontier up here. Let's see. How about Indian warriors? Let's see. Snowshoes. What are some that look kind of old-timey? We'll go, I guess these are technically vintage, so whatever, close enough. And we need one more here. I guess we'll just... What's the fort called? Let's find the French commander real fast, actually. Fort Caroline, that's important. Caroline. Okay. And we also need our French commander. Hopefully he's on here. I actually don't know. I did all of the reading for this within the last about 2 or 3 hours, so yeah. Alright, he's not on here, that's okay. Found most of the people we wanted, but that's, whatever. Alright. So I think we got all of our major people in place. First Nations snowshoes. Okay, let's try that. Although most of the snowshoes we'll be talking about are British, but yeah, these look better. These are more in line with what I had pictured. Yeah, that's about right. That seems pretty 18th century to me. All right. So Sean will be here in a moment, and then we can really get underway with all of this. How many of you are familiar with Robert Rogers? Or how about this? How many of you have watched the show Turn, where Robert Rogers is featured fairly prominently as a character? Okay, so Sean is here apparently.
Hey.
Hey, how's it going? We're waiting on you for some Battle of the Snowshoes. Or Battle on Snowshoes, excuse me.
I don't know the snowshoes quite as well. I know it was involved in the French Indian War and involved Robert's Rangers.
You're right about that.
What's up?
You're right so far.
Well, there we go, man. That's about as far as I know. But if we're getting into winter battles, and my apologies, everybody. The Saints lost their playoff game today. It might be Drew Brees' last game, and he did horribly. And so the thing I was at, everybody was like really like depressed. You know what I mean? And I can't help it. Just lost track of time. So I'm sorry. But anyway. Yeah. Yeah, but no, if I was going to talk about anything involving winter, one of the things I would like to talk about would be the fact that, of course, armies don't usually attack or do much of anything during winter time, but that doesn't mean winter time is wasted. And I mentioned this in reference to the Tullahoma campaign with Rosecrans in 1863. Now, Rosecrans at that time is commander of the Army of the Cumberland, facing off against the Army of Tennessee led by Braxton Bragg. And Rosecrans had properly understood that he could not really effectively advance against Bragg until his cavalry was at least as good as Bragg's. But, Lincoln, Stanton, they didn't care about that. They wanted him just to attack. And he kept saying, I'm going to wait. And the winter wasn't wasted, even though the Army of the Cumberland, for over 6 months, did not take a major offensive action. The winter and spring was not wasted. The men were drilled thoroughly. The cavalry was allowed to fight a series of skirmishes and small battles, several of which they came out on top. And that accumulated experience and training, I think, is a leading reason why Rosecrans, when he did launch his offensive, was able to maneuver Bragg out of central Tennessee and all the way to Chattanooga. Now, of course, because the Tullahoma campaign did not culminate in some massive Gettysburg-scale battle, it was ignored. It's still ignored to this day.
And Rosecrans knew that as who got removed by Grant.
True, very true. Rosecrans, though, he sent a letter to Stanton, where Stanton was like, hey, Meade's won Gettysburg, and Grant's taken Vicksburg, and Port Hudson's going to fall. And Stanton said, will you not complete the victory? And Rosecrans was like, dude, my army's just marched through horrendous weather. We have maneuvered the enemy out of their position. And he said, I hope the War Department will not ignore our accomplishment because this is words, I hope they will not ignore our accomplishment because it is not written in letters of blood. And I mean, there almost was a major battle at Tullahoma proper. It didn't happen because Bragg evacuated. But Bragg was prepared to defend the location, and that could have happened.
Yeah.
At any rate, Rosecrans spent his winter wisely. And we can think of other occasions of that as well, too, right? Like Valley Forge with George Washington. You had Friedrich von Steuben running around drilling them in, right? And teaching them the not necessarily Prussian tactics per se, but just Prussian drill so they would be able to stand in open field against the British. And I'm not saying American units couldn't necessarily do that. Some of them could, but not enough of them. You know, before Steuben was on the scene, Washington's army, the quality was like, it was all over the place. The army is much more streamlined after that in terms of what it can do. You know, which is one of the reasons why the British don't actually seek a field battle with Washington after Steuben's reforms. So, you know, beyond just going out and fighting and brawling and whatnot, you know, winter in some ways probably is more optimally used as a time to really train, reorganize, and get your armies ready. You know? But that said, if I do want to mention a winter battle, one that does interest me is Operation Nordwind. You know much about this one?
I know about it from Panzer General 2.
How'd you do that scenario, though?
What do you mean? You just plow through. I mean, if you have the advanced, experienced Panzer units, you just bust through. If you don't, you probably lose. But
yeah, you ever play the scenario like not campaign, just like regular scenario where you have the historic units?
No, it sounds horrible.
It's fucking impossible, man.
Well, there's a reason it failed. I mean,
but you're right, man. If in Panzer General 2, if you build up the experience, yeah, you'll just plow right the fuck through those Americans. And of course, that weird German guy comes in after the scenario's over and goes like, "You are a military genius. They will study this in the Potsdam Academy for generations." You know. But yeah, no. Operation Nordwind.
We can't follow this up, so it won't mean shit. But it was brilliant. And you'll probably be tried for war crime just because you embarrassed a lot of important people.
Wait, what about Operation Conrad though in Panzer General 2?
Yeah, I think at one point, if you win Conrad, they'll say, "Now we can send supplies to General Paulus at Stalingrad," or something like that. It's something crazy where you have to believe that they've somehow managed to keep a tenuous link with an army deep in Russia.
God, I remember I beat Conrad with my juiced panzers, and they were like, "The Soviet offensives have collapsed. The Western Allies have sought peace. The Third Reich lives on." And I'm like, oh, great. It makes no fucking sense, though, you know?
Well, also, you keep winning battles, but you still find yourself going on the defensive, retreating toward Berlin somehow.
Oh, yeah, like when I told you when I played Normandy in Panzer General 1, and I, like, eradicated the British, the Canadians, and the Americans. Like, I drove them into the sea, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing is up is like, you couldn't stop the D-Day landings. And I'm like, whoa, I just did. Like, you know, like, shouldn't this be like game over? Didn't I win or some shit? Or should they just like cut right to an Eastern Front scenario? Like, why am I fighting Operation Cobra? I just beat these fuckers, you know?
I mean, maybe if they transitioned you to the south of France, you had to fight Dragoon, that might make sense, but fighting Cobra
that could make sense.
That wouldn't make any sense.
It made no goddamn sense, man.
So
I eradicated every Allied unit on the field. Anyway, going back to Nordwind.
Could you give us some general context on the 7 Years' War, and especially the North American component of it?
Oh, just like general context, like why it's happening and who's allying with who?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of that general overview, because I think it is a fairly complex war, and you know, I think it's worth noting before we get into the specifics of the snowshoe battle.
I gotcha. The 7 Years' War is very much the sequel to the War of the Austrian Succession. And, you know, not every war is a sequel to another war. Like, I don't think the War of the Austrian Succession is a sequel to the Spanish Succession. You know, actually, the sequel to the Spanish Succession is probably the War of the Quadruple Alliance. But anyway, the 7 Years' War, though, is born out of the fact that unless you were Prussia, no one was satisfied with how the Austrian Succession ended. Nobody but Prussia. But Prussia finds itself in a precarious position. Sure, they've got a great army, but economically they are no powerhouse. And they have an enemy in Austria, and of course the Russians are increasingly antagonistic towards them with the Tsarina Elizabeth. At the same time, you get something very fascinating happen. It's called the Diplomatic Revolution. It's where France and Austria ally, which France and Austria had been enemies for 200 years. So this was considered like some crazy shit, the fact that they would like ally with each other. At the same time, the British, instead of favoring the Austrians, who were their, who were their allies before and after the 7 Years' War, now they're going to be sending their subsidies to the Prussians. So you already have these tensions brewing in Europe. But then of course, you have the colonial competition in North America. The French really in North America got obsessed with the frontiers. So a few years before this, the French, to show the other native tribes that they should ally to them, launched a brutal war against a small tribe in the Great Lakes region that happened to have backed the British in the previous conflict. And the French are now obsessed with controlling the Ohio Forks. The British, of course, feel the same way. Those forces will collide, the battles of Fort Necessity and the Monongahela, which is also known as Braddock's Defeat. So war is touched off between France and Britain. And then Prussia will invade Saxony in an attempt to neutralize them before they can join up with the Austrians. And thereby you set off the 7 Years' War in Europe. So yeah, it's a conflict between empires and European regional rivals. And as far as the alliance system goes, it involves some odd combinations, to say the least. Like, Austria and France being allies is really fucking weird. In fact, God, off the top of my head, I'm sure somebody in the chat might say something else, but I cannot, off the top of my head, think of another war where Austria and France were allies.
Huh. I don't think I can either, actually.
Yeah, all I can think of is just the 7 Years' War. That's all I got for you.
And I guess we don't count when Napoleon forced them to be his ally at certain points.
Yeah, I mean, they're so lackluster. Like, you're talking about like when they invaded Russia in 1812 and their army advances for a bit,
Yeah, stuff like that.
Although, to be a bit fair, I would say Austria was probably more enthusiastic than Prussia in that invasion. Simply because, Napoleon had married an Austrian princess, so there was a bit more of an incentive to be invested. But yeah, they were not really that invested.
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, you want to get into snowshoes, you said then?
Yeah, so there actually are technically 2 battles on snowshoes, but only one of them matters, so that's the one we'll talk about. I'll talk about the first one very briefly, just to give some context. The first battle on snowshoes was January 21st, 1757, and this was the first time that the French, Canadian, and Indian forces had fought against Rogers' Rangers, or one of the first, and because it was wintry conditions, Rogers' men were wearing snowshoes. This was just a bloody draw. Nothing really happened. Each side lost about a dozen men. If anything, the French side won because they had a larger force, so proportionally they lost fewer men. But they did comment that the British snowshoes were interesting. And that was basically the battle, so that one's not that interesting. So the second battle, however, is over a year later, March 13th, 1758. And if you just type in the battle on snowshoes, this is the one you'll get. So it's worth noting that basically most of the conflicts on the northern frontier were between the Indian allies of the French. Some most skirmishes, they used the Indians as their frontline guys, sometimes Canadian militia, occasionally regulars, but mostly locals. And on the British side, they would mostly rely upon colonial militias who had local knowledge, like Rogers' Rangers, or actually Israel Putnam had some Rangers as well, the guy who later served as an American general in the Revolution. So, for the most part, the Indians are frankly better at this than the Rangers are. So most of these little skirmishes go the way of the French. But of course, in the end, the major battles will go to the British, so that's how the war went. But if we're talking about if you had to guess from a random battle perspective, any given little battle, who won, you'd probably be safer voting for the French. They probably won the little skirmish.
Oh, definitely. They have more native allies, and plus the Côte de Bois, the Canadian hunters, if you will.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
professional fur trappers and whatnot.
yeah, exactly. So you and also, I mean, the French, their strategy in the New World until really the French Indian War was raiding and skirmishing. In fact, the governor of French Canada at the time, of Vaudeville, I'm butchering his name probably. In fact, definitely. But that's what he favored. It was Wolfe. I'm not sorry, not Wolfe. It was Montcalm who wanted to fight a more conventional European war in many ways. Montcalm did not like working with the natives, which I don't entirely blame Montcalm for his choice of strategy. I think in many ways Montcalm saw that, hey, the British are not just like sending money; they're sending regular troops here. You're not going to beat them with just skirmish tactics, you know?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you could pull off the ambush like in the Monongahela when Braddock's column is approaching Fort Duquesne, and they ambush the column. But it should also be kept in mind that there were a lot of indigenous allies there. You had a decent French contingent, and you had men who were very good at irregular warfare. But if you've got a very strong column of British soldiers with at least decent amount of skirmishers and flankers, yeah, those natives and Côte de Bois, they're not going to be able to do anything. You know?
Yeah, so the second battle of snowshoes, or on snowshoes, this is a battle that probably should not have been fought.
So, now, why is that?
The idea by the British, and this was mandated by a lieutenant colonel, I forgot to write down his name, but the idea was to try to capture Fort Carillon, which is in today's upstate New York, as you can see on the map, but back then this was basically French territory. So the colonies did not extend as far as they did at that time, or back then. So this was within French territory. It's a major French fort, and capturing it would extend British control. So it's a great target, but the British did not have the forces in place to try to take it. So, basically the plan was to have 400 British troops try to take it. When they did some initial scouting using Israel Putnam's men, they estimated that there were at least 600 Indian troops there in addition to whatever French troops were there. But they stuck with the original plan for 400 men to take it, and then they only produced 180 men to actually go. We'll come back to that in a minute. There's a bit more context here. Robert Rogers was a famous leader of Rangers. If anything, of all the leaders of Rangers, he was almost certainly the best and most famous and the most transformative. That's not to say he was always successful, but he clearly had a vision for how to do this kind of thing, and he always trained his men well and was always a dangerous opponent. His men were able to hold their own with the French fur trappers and the Indians, but as we'll see, he too was human and made some mistakes. He's also a captain at the time of the battle, even though he was promoted to major later. So let's go back to Fort Carillon. This battle actually takes place, as I said, in March, but the snow is still deep. There's about 4 feet of snow on the ground. But fortunately, Robert Rogers is leading mostly his men and then a handful of volunteers out of an Irish regiment of regulars. So they all have the snowshoes on, and this helps them to walk through literally 4 feet of snow to try to take this fort by surprise. Now, the French are aware that they're coming because when Putnam was doing his recon, one of his men got captured and spilled the beans on the British intention to attack. So the commander of the fort is a French captain named Louis-Philippe Ledessus de Hebecourt or something like that. Anyway, this captain knows they're coming, so he deploys two groups, one of 100 men, one of 200 men, to look for the British. And these are mixed forces of basically Canadians or French settlers in the New World and Indians. For Roger's part, they're basically doing cross-country skiing to get around. It's very tiring. At one point, they take a 3-hour break on top of a hill. And if you're clever and 4 feet of snow, you can just duck down while you're resting and no one will know you're there. Rogers was better about this than one of the guys looking for him. So he happened to notice that there was a group of maybe 100 or so, mostly Indian troops, about to approach. So he set up his men in ambush, and he took them out pretty easily. And his men then divided themselves between pursuit and collecting scalps and loot. But what he did not know is that the other force of 200 Frenchmen was right behind that force of 100. So as soon as his men broke into disarray, failed to reload and all that, the other group of Frenchmen, or French and Indians, however you want to put it, attacked. And then this led to a complete reversal of fortune, where Rogers' men were massively outnumbered and on the losing side. So for an hour and a half, Rogers and his men fought desperately, but most of their comrades had been killed or wounded. So Rogers and some of the men who wanted to break out just ran away. I think he even abandoned his overcoat or something, so he was pretty desperate. It was cold as hell, so you're desperate if you're abandoning something like that.
Oh yeah, shit.
And most of the other men surrendered. And they thought they would be okay, but then when the Indians were checking their pockets, they found a few scalps, so all the men who got captured got scalped. But it is worth noting that Rogers' men started the scalping, not the Indians. So anyway, they were taken captive. Rogers managed to retreat. He doesn't really detail how he did it, even though he lived for years after this, but the French developed their own versions of the story. They reported that he had been killed in action, which is not true, and they also reported that he threw himself down the hill or down the mountainside to get down to the frozen lake and then cross the lake. So there were a couple different versions of the story, and to this day, the path down the mountain to Lake George is called Rogers Slide. Although he almost certainly did not do that. So he made it back to his own lines, and his reputation was shattered. People assumed that he had just been incompetent. And he was ultimately saved because one of his men from captivity wrote a letter about what had happened and backed up Rogers' story 100%. And then his superiors realized that this was a hopeless situation and that he did his best, so they let him raise more men, and he kept fighting, had a very distinguished record by the end of the war, but his reputation was almost destroyed. So he might as well have thrown himself off the mountainside. But anyway, yeah, so that's what happened. And he actually had his unit completely rebuilt by July. So he was able to raise and train troops very rapidly.
Why was he? Do you know why he was so good at being able to train his troops so rapidly?
I mean, I imagine most of them were frontiersmen. They didn't require that much training, would be my guess.
That makes sense. I get why he was able to raise them, though, because I believe they had like extra pay if you're in the Rangers. You know what I mean?
Probably so.
Like
you're at a disadvantage.
I mean, I think so, But anyway, it's impressive stuff, man. You ever read about him trying to in the American Revolution? You ever read about what he did there?
A little bit. I've watched the show Turn. Have you ever seen that?
No, but I remember it came out. I was staying with some friends in New York, and they were watching it for all the New York references.
Yeah.
But they also made fun of it and said it was kind of shitty. So tell me, how was it?
I thought it was a good show. I don't know how accurate it is exactly, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Rodney Rogers in that one is, or Robert Rogers, excuse me. He is somewhat coarse and nasty, but at the same time, he is sort of a badass.
Of course.
And the British try to betray and murder him, then he tries to defect to the Americans, but Washington won't have him.
That makes some sense. Washington was never comfortable with irregulars. ever.
Yeah, Washington basically said he wasn't a gentleman and told him to go fuck off.
Oh man, how many seasons do they have of that show anyway?
A few, 3 or 4, I think. It was a good one. At least in terms of entertainment value. It's about the Culpeper spy ring, and also one of the other characters who's a lot of fun is Captain Simcoe, who's basically the British equivalent of Rogers. He's a guy.
Oh yeah, John Graves Simcoe.
Yeah, and he's actually a real person who is
Yeah, no, he
a
is.
figure in Canadian history, but in this show he's a fucking psychopath.
What?
Yeah, complete
Oh,
psychopath.
that's
in the
fucked
show.
up, man.
You
I don't
he's
know, man.
basically
Like, I mean,
the founder
okay,
of
I'm
Toronto.
no John Graves Simcoe expert, but he's not a psychopath. What the hell?
Well, I don't think they have any evidence for his wartime activities, at least not in any detail. But in this show, he's just this guy who murders for fun and enjoys leading men around raping, pillaging, and plundering. And then apparently he has a change of heart. He has like a soul-changing moment because he suffers a nearly fatal wound at the end of the show. And when he goes home to Britain to recuperate, he's looking for new assignments. And then some older guy says, John, why don't you just take up a nice, fun assignment being a governor? And, make people's lives better. And then he decides to go to Canada and just be this peaceful governor who is suddenly not a bloodthirsty psychopath. And then he ends slavery in Canada, too, while he's at it. Because why the hell not?
Because why the hell not? What a transition for John Graves Simcoe, huh? Real character arc there.
Yeah, and it's all because he realized, wait, I can die too from bullets. I better be nice. I mean, I guess that's what happened. I don't know, man.
Why make a TV show where like Jeffrey Dahmer just realizes, you know what? I could just teach kids instead of eating them.
Yeah,
you
could do that.
Teenagers. Sorry, teenagers, not kids. We get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's a ridiculous thing where there are some characters who don't really deserve that kind of treatment. It's just I don't know what Simcoe, the historical Simcoe, did to deserve that.
I don't think he did anything quite that bad. I mean, on the other hand, Tarleton was pretty rough. Tarleton was a very ruthless man. He does have one of my favorite quotes by any general ever. What do you say? I've killed more men and slept with more women than anyone else in America.
That sounds about right.
Bloody ban. But yeah, Tarleton's a ruthless fuck for sure. But I guess if it was a general, I'd want him leading my cavalry, right?
Maybe. And I guess it depends on who your other options are.
So I'll talk a little bit about Operation Nordwind right now.
Okay.
All right.
Let me pull up a couple images.
Gotcha. So Operation Nordwind is the last major German offensive in the West during World War II. The Battle of the Bulge had failed. Hitler, the generals, they knew this. But they decided that in the South, where Jacob Devers has the French First Army and the American Seventh Army, the lines must be thinner because the Allies have had to put more resources into reducing the bulge. So arguably they can gain some local advantage. By the way, this very much strikes me as you're just thrashing out at your enemies as you're dying. I mean, think about it. You're attacking across the Rhine River into Strasbourg. There's no major strategic advantage. It's not like if you take Strasbourg, like, everything's going to be better,
If you take Strasbourg, Churchill commits suicide and the Allies just fold.
Yeah, they took Strasbourg, bro, it's over,
Yeah, it's like that one place we didn't know was the decisive factor. The game over screen just flashed in command headquarters. It's done.
Now, to be fair, the Germans were trying to, of course, achieve surprise. They did not, which they did in the Bulge. That's one thing that was always controversial with the Bulge was the Germans did achieve surprise. They did not at Nordwind. In fact, the intelligence chief for the Americans went up to them and said, the Germans are going to attack. And the guy said, why? He says, because they think we're all going to be stupid on New Year's, and they've obviously been massing some forces. And they did. The Germans literally attacked like 30 minutes before midnight on New Year's Eve. Anyway, the initial German attacks were almost a complete failure. However, eventually they did commit to the 6th SS, which was a mountain unit. So they've been fighting like in Norway and stuff. So they're used to battling in winter conditions. So the second phase of the German offensive does create a dent. During the attack, Eisenhower has a bit of a panic and is like, oh, why are we trying to hold this territory? Why don't we just retreat? And Charles de Gaulle is like, we cannot withdraw. We cannot sacrifice Strasbourg to the enemy. We must stand. And so Eisenhower submits not for a good military reason, but for political reasons. And the Allies do. They eventually are able to slow down and halt the German advance. One interesting thing about it was the Maginot Line was in this area and still intact in areas. So the Americans used the Maginot Line. So there you go, guys. The Maginot Line did see combat, just not with French soldiers. That's all. Anyway, Himmler was actually posted with an army command to the south. He pieced together a smaller attacking force and launched a supporting attack, which honestly had a surprising amount of early success considering how weak it was. But ultimately, by late January, Nordwind has fallen off the rails. It's bogged down. Meanwhile, the Soviets have launched their winter offensive in Poland. And this one's also worth talking about. This is probably the most decisive Soviet victory of the war, or lopsided at least. And I say that because, of course, Stalingrad's important, and so is the destruction of Army Group Center. But the Soviet offensive in January 1945 is rapid. They inflict much heavier loss than the Germans than they receive. Soviet losses were surprisingly light for a major Soviet offensive. And they pressed to the gates of Berlin within like 2 weeks. Now, why were they able to do this? In part because Hitler had not allowed an elastic defense. The German defenses were too close to the Soviet front lines. So when the offensive started and the Soviets did their typical like heavy artillery barrages, they were able to blast holes in the German lines relatively easily. Plus, Hitler has committed his entire armored reserve to the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. And then whatever little units he has lying around then get to attack at Operation Nordwind. So there is no armored reserve that can, say, blunt one of the main Soviet axes of advance. Also, furthermore, should be kept in mind that at the same time Hitler is launching attacks to try to relieve Budapest. The Operation Conrad, like we spoke about earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the Soviets overrun Poland and are within the gates of Berlin in about 2 weeks. The Soviet offensive then stops, and it's interesting that the Soviet offensive bogs down for a bit. There's a lot of debate on why that is. For one thing, of course, the Germans launched Operation Solstice, which in the first few days had some success. It definitely caught the Soviets by surprise. That should not be understated. They definitely caught the Soviets a bit flat-footed. Some arguments are made that Stalin wanted the attacks towards Berlin to stop because he wanted to conquer more territory for the Soviet Union, right? Like our men haven't advanced enough into the Czech Republic, and maybe we can grab Austria while we're at it or something, right?
Yeah, I think that's probably
Other
true.
arguments say that Stalin genuinely wanted to secure his flanks. Other arguments are that Soviet logistics really did break down as they got closer to Germany, and this should not be forgotten, discipline as well. You know, the Russians, when they're going through Poland, are pretty brutal. They're very brutal when they're going through German communities and areas. And there was a breakdown in discipline and order in the Soviet units as they're getting closer to Germany. Anyway, no, the Soviet offensive of January 1945 is one of the most successful winter offensives ever launched. excellent planning, and of course, it doesn't hurt when the Germans have a bad defensive scheme and no Panzer reserves to stop you, right?
Yeah. True.
Yeah, but yeah, no. So it's yeah, but so those are some of the more notable winter offensives of the European theater, right there. You got any questions, man?
Not right offhand. We do have a super chat that came in just a minute ago. I guess this is more of a question for you. Nerve AMV Maker, $5. Thank you. He wants to know,
Thanks.
which major Jacksonian era scholar do you guys prefer? Charles Sellers, The Market Revolution, or Daniel Walker Howe, What Hath God Wrought?
Yeah, you're taking me back to like trying to study for comps over here. Have you read either one of these books?
No.
Okay. I am not an expert on the Market Revolution. I did own a copy at one time. I couldn't get into it and got rid of it. But the Market Revolution was, for lack of a better term, a bit more of a pro-Jackson book. It was also trying to make an argument that this is the era where we were shifting towards capitalism, away from republicanism and the freeholder idea, like what Thomas Jefferson had championed. I have not read What Hath God Wrought all the way through, but I have read parts of it. From what I did read, which would be about 100 pages worth, to be fair, it read to me like a Whig propaganda book. Like, there's this evil, stupid Jackson man who is in there fucking up shit, and he supports the plebs. And what we really need is some good professional managerial class people to come in and clean this shit up, i.e. the Whigs. And I did read that Daniel Walker Howe wrote an article where he said that Abraham Lincoln was the last Whig president because he said all Lincoln did was Whig policies. I was like, I get it. Lincoln was a Whig, a very loyal Whig. And I do believe the Republican Party was more Whiggish than Democrat, of course. It might be a bit overstated, though, since the Whigs were not an avowedly anti-slavery party and the Republicans were. So it should be kept in mind. Between the two of them, it's a little, I don't know. Howe is an easier writer, but I felt like a more partisan writer. And I didn't really dive into Sellers. It wasn't really easy to read him. At least, but keeping in mind, too, this is when I was having to read, like, so many fucking books, right? But I did get the impression that Sellers probably had the more interesting and creative argument. So I don't know if I can say that I prefer one or the other. I mean, I feel like Howe is... he's Clay and Sellers is Jackson, which is always an interesting thing to me that, historians still take up the arguments of the past, right? Like, I feel like I go to some ancient Roman historian and be like, okay, Marius or Sulla? What do you say?
Yeah, exactly. I find it weird when people get partisan over the distant past where the outcome has already been decided. There's no reason to cheerlead.
Yeah, but it's like my dad said. I mean, what are the four saddest words in English language? What might have been.
I've never heard anybody say that before.
It's true, though. What might have been. I mean, hell, I support the Jacobites. I mean, it's a fucking lost cause, right? But, like, in terms of board games, I'll play anybody but the Roundheads. I'll never play fucking Parliament. Fuck Cromwell. I'm not playing that asshole.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm for the Stuarts, all right? So...
Bonnie Prince Charles, or whatever his name is.
Yeah, man, we get Bonnie Prince Charlie in there, right? Yeah, I always play the fucking Jacobites if I can. But, I mean, it's like you said, it's been decided. They're done. The Stuarts aren't coming back. Yeah. I mean, in theory, they could. Like, Queen Elizabeth shows up with everybody, even Prince Andrew, he's invited somehow, and, they all die, like, in the beginning of King Ralph. Have you ever seen that movie? They all die, and now, what do you know? We get a Stuart on the throne. That could happen, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, you guys can hear my cat in the background. She's just downstairs screaming, and this is not a big cat, by the way, guys. She's about 6 or 7 pounds, but she just walks around and screams sometimes. And,
Damn.
also just
I
bounces
have
off the
heard
walls.
that. I also got to tell you, about 5-10 minutes ago, there was somebody out. There was somebody or group of people outside, like screaming about something.
I didn't
You
hear
know.
that.
Yeah, you didn't hear it, but I could hear it. I turned the volume down to listen to them, and I was like, "What the fuck is that noise?" I mean, I don't mean like a normal like people are drunk and yelling at each other. I just mean like some weird screaming. But hey, everybody's going crazy, you know.
Yeah, as Joker said, what was he said in the most recent movie? Uh, People are just crazy these days.
That's the Joaquin Phoenix one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we saw a lot of Joker-esque riots over the last, into 2020 and into 2021, right?
Yeah, I feel like a couple of the people we've seen at various protests the last year or so easily could have replaced that guy with the fucking Viking outfit, or that any of those that guy or any number of other people could have taken Joker's place as being the guy on the hood of the police car.
Oh yeah, I know. I saw a Viking guy and was like, I knew it. I knew the Lord Humongous was from the Road Warrior was coming. You know.
Yeah, I mean that guy. I gotta give him some props just for creative outfitting. I would have never thought to wear that to a protest over Trump. I mean, it would have never occurred to me. So, hats off.
Yeah, me neither, man. I mean, fucker got style. What can we say?
Yeah,
But
creativity.
no, thank you, Nerve. I gotta I want to say this though. Thank you, Nerve AMV Maker. It was a great question. I'm sorry I couldn't answer it a bit better, maybe because I haven't read either book all the way through, but I do know of them. And it's taking me back, man. I feel like I'm back in grad school trying to learn about the Jacksonian era. You know.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of grad school, do you remember what one of your classmates said about the cost of reform? You know what I'm talking
One of my
about?
classmates said about the cost of
Or the
reform.
cost of the Reformation? Or
Yes, yes, I
religious
do.
enlightenment,
Yes, I
that's what it
do.
was. Oh yeah,
The Enlightenment. Yes.
yeah, Professor. I have an observation. Here it says the religious enlightenment came at a high cost. There's a financial aspect involved. Oh yeah.
Yeah, see, that is what he prefaced it by all right, here's a story. So we're in an enlightenment class and we were looking at a book called The Religious Enlightenment, talking about religious enlightenment reformers and all the rest. It was a good book too. Um and he's like, what kind of elements do we see here? And we're mentioning a few things, and then this guy goes like, well, there's also a financial aspect. And literally, Dr. Popkin is like, really? Let's say more. Like he's kind of like, maybe this guy's found something I haven't seen. He goes like, well, it says here in the beginning of chapter 5 that the religious enlightenment came at a high cost to those who support it. And he goes like, no. I mean, like, he is shutting this shit down right away. And we're all like, oh my God, this really is the dumbest crap I've ever heard.
Yeah, if you have to explain the figurative use of language to a grad student, you know that the shit is deep.
Well, I mentioned that because what did you have an update about that grad student or former grad student?
No, it just popped in my mind because that's one of the most vivid memories of grad school, and I was not in that class, but you told me about it, and probably 8 other people did. So I feel like I was in the room, even though I know I wasn't. I think I was in the hallway that night because I was gonna go out with you guys afterwards, so I wasn't far away. If I had been in the room, there's no fucking way I would not have laughed in his face. I mean, everybody else was too polite. I wasn't. I'd just fucking laugh in his face over that. That's fucking stupid.
I get what you're saying, but I honestly, at that moment, I actually had a moment of true horror. because I was like, oh my God, they let you in here? They let anybody in here? Wait, if they let anybody in here, what the fuck am I doing here?
Oh God, yeah, that's one way to think of it. I remember I had that thought too at some point, but fuck,
No. For me, I get what you're saying. Like it was funny afterwards, but at that moment, I was like, oh my God. I mean, when I say oh my God, like Control 2, right? When he's like, they're eating her, and then they're gonna eat me. Oh my God. It's like that. I mean, it was painful, man. It fucking like the other older grad student who I actually liked, even though he was incoherent, right?
yeah, having women over on his boat.
Yeah, but he looked at him like, what the fuck? But I remember, like, he was talking to that guy, and then I was speaking to him a little. No, I'm sorry, he wasn't in that class. I told him the story about that. He was like, what the fuck? And then he told me that guy, he was like, look, I was around that guy for like a day, and I realized he's got there's no fucking marbles up there. He's nuts. He's gone. He's gone. He's done. You know?
Yeah. I was just amazed that he was able to hang around, and that apparently the man has no shame either. I don't know why he was in grad school. I mean, I know he was a lawyer. He got disbarred, and then he decided to go to grad school to be a history professor, I guess.
Wait, when you said no shame, are you talking about the porn story?
Yeah, so the same person we've been talking about, the high price guy, also, a couple years later, I believe, was in the computer lab early in the morning. He had spent the night there, effectively, and there was a girl who got there at 7 a.m. So she went in the computer lab and found him looking at porn with his pants down. And then she reported him, and he got banned from the history floor of the office tower. Which might lead you to think that if that happened to you, you'd probably drop out. Especially if you don't necessarily need to be there. Why the fuck would you keep showing up if everybody knows that you were, spanking your monkey in the fucking computer lab, right? No fucking way. He kept showing up for a couple more semesters, maybe 2 or 3. And it's because every university now has a policy of trying to have maximum graduation rates. So your professors, even in grad school, are not allowed to advise you to drop out. They can only hint at it by saying, I don't want to be your advisor anymore. That's as strong as they can phrase it. But it is basically almost impossible at most programs for your advisor to tell you to call it quits. So Overstreet, with this guy, we won't name him, kept getting dropped over and over, and the only person who would take him up at a certain point and agree to be his advisor did Byzantine history. So this guy who did American legal history was going to switch his field and learn Greek and Latin at the age of 60-something years old. And a person actually found him who was willing to do this. I think he was just doing it as a fuck you to the other professors. Because there's no fucking way he thought this was going to work. Anyway,
wait. Why would it be a fuck you to the other professors though? Sorry,
because
the
why person involved is a dick. And he liked to stick it to his colleagues, and this was the ultimate example. So anytime he had to go meet with his new advisor, he had to schedule an appointment and clear it through the office because he wasn't allowed on the floor unless he had a specific reason to be there, and he could not go in the computer lab. And everybody knew why. This was not a well-kept secret, because the girl who found him told everyone, and then everyone else relayed the story. So there was sort of like quiet pressure on this guy to leave, but he did not catch on to it. Anyway, so this was after you left, I think. I believe.
I don't know. Like I think the banning happened after I left, because I remember the office thing did happen while I was there.
Oh shit! Really?
Yeah. No. I mean, I remembered hearing about it, but I kind of heard about it like where it was like did it happen kind of thing, sort of. Like in other words, like I didn't know the details of it, right?
Yeah.
And my guess is that it may have taken a little bit of it may have been right after I left when that like the whole ban thing was enforced, which I was thinking like you're like he's got to go special up to the floor to get in, right?
Yeah.
What I'm thinking is does he meet the advisor in the stairwell?
No, he can go up there and go in the office, but he has to make sure he announces he's coming and how long he's going to be there and all that shit. Which at a certain point, if all of these hints don't add up to you should leave, I don't know what does. If you're being treated like you're on parole. So anyway, he did that, and I think even after I left, because I transferred to a different department, I think he stayed another semester or two before he called it quits around 2014. And somebody says, oh man, he's 60, this keeps getting better and better. Okay, here's a physical description. This guy has a thin mustache, looks like stranger danger. And he also wore a trench coat and a top hat. He looked exactly like those neighborhood watch signs about strangers. Especially after he lost weight. He looked exactly like that.
I mostly remember the Coke bottle glasses.
And the Coke bottle glasses, yeah. He had Coke bottle glasses like fucking Bubbles from Trailer Park Boys.
Yeah, he kind of seemed like a mutant Bubbles to me, you know?
And he also talked like this, oh yeah! And he would repeat the last several words, what you just said, and then go, oh yeah!
Yeah. He was actually one of the first grad students I ever spoke to, and it was pretty fucking bad, you know what I mean? Like, it was... Like his first words to me were like, why'd you write that? And I was like, because I wrote it. What it was is, I'm just sitting there in a fucking big room full of grad students. Nobody knows anybody. We're all a bunch of fucking awkward nerds, whatever. And I just wrote some stuff in the notebook in front of me because that's what I would do. You know, I was still doing. I'm bored. I got a pen and paper. I'm going to write some stuff. And he's like, what are you writing for? And I'm like, I'm just writing. He's like, why are you doing that? I'm like, I don't know, leave me alone.
Didn't he reach over and tap this one pin you had on your lapel? What the hell was that?
You're right, he did do that. I forgot about that, you know? Yeah, it was really weird, though, because you had both him and, you know, you had, let's just say, we had Peter and Lee.
Yeah.
And you kind of looked at Peter and you were like, I don't know what the fuck you're here. And I look at Lee and I'm like, I don't know why the fuck you're here. But you, Lee, seem to have led an interesting life.
No, yeah, and the thing is, even if Lee wasn't quite receptive to some of the things being taught or whatever, he was clearly an intelligent man. And he did sometimes raise good points, and he understood the readings, and he participated. And you could communicate with him, and he would say things that make sense. And he's actually quite a bit older than Peter. I think he was 72 or something.
Damn.
Yeah. Also, Lee was a guy who kept trying to live. I remember one time, I didn't really get to know him that well, but one time I ran into him at a coffee shop, and he was trying to recruit me to go to some bar that has a bunch of women who I guess were younger women than him, but they would have been older than me. They're like 40-something-year-old women. He wanted me to be his wingman to go pick up women at a fucking bar. And, I was like, what, 23 or 4 at the time, so... I mean, at least Lee was living his life, though, I respect that, right?
Well, no. I mean, Lee was like, I'm reading books. I'm around young people. I'm in college. Like, Lee was having I don't know if he was having a blast.
He was having a time. But he was having a decent time. He was making the most of it.
He was having a decent time. Pete, we're just like, this guy's a fucking mutant.
Yeah. And Pete, also, he was dating a stripper half his age. Remember, he paid to get her teeth fixed, and then she dated him, and in exchange, he also had to take care of a little kid. So he'd bring the little kid to class with him at night, and then the kid would ride the fucking elevator of the office tower, and then the office staff had to take the little kid into the office and entertain him to make sure that he didn't get lost or hurt or stuck in the elevator. So then he got banned from bringing the kid there. That was even before all the other bans that were imposed on him.
Oh, God, man. I mean, look, I get to that age, we all just hope for Lee and not Pete, if we got to choose, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the worst thing about Lee, I guess, from his perspective, is he was worried that he might be an alcoholic. He's like, I'm not sure if I am or not. So, I mean, that was his biggest problem. Probably. But the thing is, I'd rather be a drop-dead drunk than be Pete. I don't know if Pete... I mean, maybe Pete might have been a drunk for all I know. I don't know. But whatever the fuck he was, that's what I want to not be. And also, remember that one girl, he would always ask her what classes she's going to take, and then he would sign up for the same classes?
No, which girl?
Ashley.
Oh. Oh,
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, he would follow her around quite a bit.
Really? I mean, she had the charisma of a burlap sack.
And the look.
No, I'm sorry. No, I'm thinking of somebody different. No, Ashley was fine. I liked Ashley. No, she was good. Sorry, Ashley. Okay?
Anyway.
I was thinking of somebody.
Oh, anyway. Yeah, so I guess he latched onto her because I guess of the women in the department, she was a tiny bit older than most of the group. So I guess she was marginally more age appropriate.
I guess. I mean, she had some life experiences. Like she had done more.
Yeah. So I guess that made some sense, but man, Pete. I do have to say there is value in having someone in your department. Is because grad school is very stressful. I think people who haven't been there don't understand this. It's very stressful, and there is some value in having someone around who sucks at everything and is worse at literally everything than you are. Because then, no matter how bad of a day you've had, you can wake up in the morning and tell yourself, you know what? At least I'm not that motherfucker.
Or what? It's like Frederick the Great versus Charles of Lorraine, where you're like, "Here's my punching bag," In
a way, I mean, yeah, like if you're having a terrible day, and terrible days will happen in grad school. I remember my uncle before I started. This is back before he cut off the whole family. He said something to the effect of, grad school is ups and downs, mostly downs. And when you're really down, what you really need is a Peter around. So that way you can look and gain some perspective. Well, you know what? I'm not that guy. So maybe there's hope for me yet.
That's funny. Back when crack.com was good. Remember crack.com?
I do.
Yeah, nobody gives a shit anymore, right? But they had that little heyday from roughly like 2007 or 8 to about 14, 15, Of course, wokeness killed it because it kills a lot of things. But they had one of their points was like, it really keeps a lot of people going? Watching Jersey Shore and seeing like Snooki, right? And being like, well, I may be like doing this horrible shit, but at least I'm not her,
Yeah, I think there's something to that. That's part of the value of reality television and why it tends to promote people who are not exactly exemplary members of society.
That's actually what his argument was in the thing. He was saying that that's why reality television promotes who they promote, so you can feel better about yourself. I mean, I would assume that if James Buchanan still conscious, he'd be like, at least I'm not Trump, and then Trump could be like, this is not Buchanan, and they can just, have a powwow, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to think, is there another story about this guy? Oh, yeah, we looked him up on Facebook, and he had been a substitute high school teacher. Remember that group that some of his former students made up about him, where they were just shitting on him nonstop?
No, what's this?
Yeah, there was a group that some local high school students had set up to really shit on this guy, and they had pictures of him up, and then they created a fake profile and made little updates on it. And yeah, they were making fun of him too. So it wasn't just people in our group.
Oh no, you could tell, man. Like, I mean, that guy was horrifying. Like I said, when he said that shit, I was like, "Why are you here? And why am I here?"
Yeah, how are we in the same program? Please explain.
Like, like you start having a moment where you're like, maybe I'm not that smart.
Well, actually, no, I know why he was there. You remember in Kentucky they have the Donovan Scholarship. If you're over 60, you can go for free. And you don't really have to do any requirements. You don't have to go through the GRE or any of that shit. You just kind of get to go. That's why he was there.
Okay.
Same thing with Lee.
I just thought this department's got some low standards. I mean, yeah, hell, you mentioned Lee. I read Lee's thesis. It was a good thesis.
Yeah.
Lee made good arguments about the Civil War.
That's because Lee actually had some ability. He wasn't just a complete loser.
Hell, Lee was the one who introduced me to the idea that rifled muskets weren't that big a deal.
Oh.
At least compared to the arguments I'd heard before.
Oh.
Right? And to be fair, I actually was already kind of thinking that maybe the rifled musket wasn't that important in the Civil War compared to what I'd read before. And Lee said it, and I said, like, well, I still thought he overstayed the case a bit, but overall I was like, yeah, he's got a point there, you know? But no, man, Lee had some good insights and stuff, so, hats off to him, although sometimes he was incoherent. Sometimes he would just say stuff like, well, what about this? He'd be like, Lee, this isn't going anywhere. What's your problem, man?
Also, there were, when I first met Lee, I actually found him pretty obnoxious, and I warmed to him over time, partly because you said positive things about him, but also because, at first he'd make sort of he'd say annoying stuff in class sometimes and, drive the conversation off the rails. But then, one time before class, I said hello. I said, how are you doing, Lee? He's like, man, I got a whiskey hangover.
Yes,
like, oh man, this guy's great. Never mind, I changed my opinion. I'm pro Lee now.
I got a whiskey hangover. But honestly, man, that was the thing though. Like I would. All right, just saying, man. I would be in class, right? And yeah, I mean, I hadn't lived some like hardcore life, but I'd gone through Katrina, and I grew up in New Orleans, and it's a pretty, the city can get pretty fucking down and dirty, right? And so when I'd be in class, sometimes on occasion you'd be like, I'd look around at everybody and be like, God, you some sheltered motherfuckers. And I'd look at Lee and I'd be like, not you though.
Yeah. Wasn't there a time in class he did some story where it began with 1972, San Francisco Harbor. I was living 1980. On a boat, drinking whiskey, writing poetry, having women over.
It was 1980, San Francisco Harbor.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I was like, you know what, Lee? That sounds fucking amazing. I wish I could have been in San Francisco Harbor in 1980, drinking whiskey, writing poems, and having women over. I mean, fuck. Fuck. It's the fucking 80s, man. Like, literally everybody I know, when I mention the 80s, they go like, oh, that was fun. Like, nobody I know ever goes like, oh, the 80s kind of sucked. Like, I hear for the 70s and the 90s and the aughts and the 50s and everything. People go, like, that decade sucked. Everybody knows, like, 80s, that was cool.
Yeah. No, I mean, I
feel like I missed out, man. I should have been born in the 60s. Maybe I would have had a blast watching
San Andreas Fire. I mean, shit. It sounds like Lee knew how to have a good time, man, and damn.
Yeah, I know, man. I know. I wish. I kind of wish I knew him right now. I feel like me and him would probably have a better time now than at that time because I was being all serious. You got to get through school type of shit.
Yeah.
Also, I do want to say though, I know you and me are just talking about people that nobody fucking knows. I hope you're all entertained on the other side of the world, wherever the fuck you are. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, we did know some interesting people. Actually, I gotta say, I ended up having a lot more friends in this department, but that department had people who are a lot more fun to talk about. Anyway, Salty Coins, to answer your question, if you're wondering, you say you're 10 years older than your classmates, you wanted to talk about you. If you have the self-awareness to wonder about that, the answer is no. So,
wait, what was the question?
Sorry. He said he's about 10 years older than his classmates, and he wonders if his classmates talk about him like this now. But I don't think they do if he has the self-awareness to ask the question, so...
Yeah, most likely not. And keep in mind something, too. Like, you warmed up to Lee. I did, too. I thought he was kind of annoying at first, too, right?
Yeah.
And sure, people made fun of him, but I don't think there was like there was not a heavy antagonism towards the guy. Right.
I guess.
And once again, he also wrote a good thesis. No, the only person who there was truly heavy antagonism towards was the Peter guy, because that guy was a moron.
Yeah.
Could be found whacking it in a fucking... I mean, I'm sorry, Salty Coins, I'm just saying, man, you're not whacking it in, I'm sorry, a computer lab. Do those even exist anymore?
A lot of them, at least at the school I'm at, they had one until the year before I came here. They removed it to make more professor office space. But yeah, they keep getting less and less group computers for grad students.
I mean,
Over
it makes
time.
sense. I mean, back then you have a lot of people on them doing whatever. Of course, I used to work computer labs about maybe 15-ish years ago. And of course, they still definitely have a use in a general college campus, but it's not what it used to be. Of course, you know.
Yeah, now as a grad
Um,
student, you're expected to have your own computer pretty much and to bring it with you everywhere you go. And most people take notes on their computers and do their readings on their computer and everything else.
and most people take notes on their computers.
Yeah,
It
that's what
makes
I've
sense,
seen.
though.
I mean, I always take notes by hand personally, but I mean, most people don't.
Yeah, I'd much rather take notes by hand. I mean, I do like computers, but I feel like my computer notes are like crappier somehow. Whenever I've done them.
Yeah,
Uh,
same. I've never had
but
much
anyway,
success
that's
with
just
that.
me. Whatever. I'm an old fogey. What the fuck? Who cares, right? I mean, hell, I played Magic the Gathering back when you could still buy Arabian Nights, so I'm ancient. All right, I'm fucking ancient. Okay. Uh, anyway, um, but wait. I gotta ask you. I gotta ask you a question though. I gotta mention something because if I'm gonna talk shit about somebody, I'm gonna talk shit about somebody from the program real quick. But it
Yeah.
wasn't while we were at the program. Okay.
Okay.
See, a lot of people didn't like Terry. Remember Terry?
Yeah, I do.
They didn't like her because she was like loud and mildly abrasive. But she was also smart. But I liked that. I liked Terry, right? But it
Yeah.
was just a big letdown because you have Terry would be running around being like, "I'm a socialist," right?
Right.
And then in 2015, it's Sanders versus Clinton, and she's like hardcore Clinton. And back when I was like on Facebook and would actually engage in this kind of crap, I was like, Terry, you're a socialist. Why the fuck aren't you backing Sanders? You know?
Yeah.
And I just to say it, man, that was actually a big. I don't say this too often, but it was actually like a big letdown for me, like on a personal level. I was like, what the fuck? I thought you were a socialist. You know?
Right. I had a similar experience with not only Terry but another New Yorker in my current department. Both of them claim this girl, just like Terry, claims to be a socialist. She's from New York, talks about New York all the time, and then went hardcore for Hillary from start to finish. And when somebody challenged her on Facebook about that very issue, she said, "Well, apparently you and I have very different definitions of what socialism is."
Really now?
Yeah, I have a screenshot of that because I found it so astounding. And also, after the election, I made the mistake of posting my analysis of the election on Facebook. A mistake I will never again repeat. Which is also why I mostly do shit on YouTube anonymously now, because, god damn it, Facebook is toxic as hell. And it's impossible to have a rational conversation. So anyway,
You could look. I think you can have a rational conversation on Facebook. I'm not saying it's easy. I did it for years, for the most part. But you got to really like. I don't know. I for the most part was somebody who, if you're posting anything online, you should try to be like if you're writing anything online, when people see your writing, they take it more seriously
yeah.
inherently. So be careful with your words, and and whatever you do, don't make any of this kind of shit personal. If you can avoid it. And I'm not saying I was perfect; that would happen too.
Yeah.
But that was generally speaking my rule of thumb. And stay polite. Whatever you fucking do, stay polite.
Anyway,
You know?
I basically posted my analysis why Hillary lost. And that she threw it away. She blew it. She ran a terrible campaign. And then Terry was furious, and she wrote, like, "I can't believe I was ever friends with you, and that I ever had you over to my house." As if I had betrayed her in some way just because I thought Hillary ran a bad campaign.
That was the thing, though. Like when she went in for Hillary, it wasn't just like, I want a woman there. I mean, she went hard for Hillary, and I'm like, you're not a socialist.
Well, not only that, but it's also interesting. We know two New Yorkers. I know both of them. You know Terry. who identified as socialist and then got super, super, super hardcore into the Hillary campaign. And both of them accepted her claim to be a New Yorker, even though Hillary just was literally a carpetbagger who just declared herself from New York so she could get some Wall Street fundraising. And they just immediately latched on to her as, yeah, she's our savior. With that Moynihan seat was in trouble. And I think the person I know said that literally. The Moynihan seat was in trouble in 2000. No, it wasn't. It's fucking New York. The Democrats win with 65% of the vote every election, no matter what. What the fuck are you talking about? You could have run a soup can and won that election. Kirsten Gillibrand wins comfortably every time she runs, and she sucks at politics. For real. I mean, anybody could have won.
Oh God, man! Like, fuck, dude! Like, you're talking about that, man. I remember that time, like, Hillary would just show up around New York, like, wearing her Yankees hat, and I was like, "Fuck you! The Mets are better."
Yeah.
Like, if you had any fucking spine, you'd root for the Mets.
Yeah.
That takes guts and commitment. The fucking Yankees, gross.
Yeah. Also, even on because I think of all the social media platforms, YouTube's probably the most intelligent overall. But I saw some random video. I forget what the person was talking about. But they were just trying to give an overview of some recent event. And I saw a comment that said, "This is stupid. Fuck neoliberalism / Keynesianism." As if those two things are inseparable and the same. And I don't know.
There are people who think that they are similar, and I don't agree with that.
Well, I mean, I can see how you can argue that neoliberalism emerges from Keynesianism to an extent.
Yeah.
But I think there's still a clear difference between the two, and at best, neoliberalism is a mutation of Keynesianism.
Yeah, it would have been funnier if these, like, fuck neoliberalism / communism. That would have been good.
Yeah, I mean, because clearly those two things go hand in hand.
Yeah, man. Well, I like that the chat got more active once we started talking about fucking weirdos from a grad program over 10 years ago.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I left there in 2013. I think you left in, what, 2011?
Yeah. The fall semester of 2011 was the last one for me, and then I moved out in January 2012.
Yeah. But anyway, so I was there, and then I think Michael left a semester after that. So the last year I was there, I was just applying to PhD programs. I already had my master's in hand, and I was just hanging out at Kentucky, and I was a TA, just taking random classes pretty much. So I sort of had a year off, even though I was still in school, and that was a weird time. But yeah, it really struck me socially how in Kentucky, if you're not from Kentucky, all the friends you'll make are people who also are not from Kentucky.
Yes, that's that struck me as well too. But as you know, I'm no fan of Kentucky, and I got my own theories on what makes Kentucky not work, in my opinion. But yeah. Generally speaking, that did seem to be the case. What a waste of time in that regard. But you got to make a try at it, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think we tried. It seems like every time we'd invite a Kentucky native to an event, whether it's a board game or whatever, a lot of them would say they're going and then never show up.
Yeah, they did that shit all the time. Meanwhile, William would fucking show up, right?
Yeah, who's out of Alabama, right?
Yeah, William, the Alabama communist.
Yeah.
Who is now an Alabama Trump supporter.
Yeah, because you can go straight from Trotsky to Trump. I mean, it's just a direct pipeline.
It fucking happens.
For him it was, though. Like, for him it was.
But it was hilarious. We were hanging out with the guy. He was like a Trotskyite and everything, and he's like, "Yeah, man, Trotsky's in charge. Soviet Union would have been fine." And he had Soviet stuff in his home, and he designed Soviet board games. And a few years later, he's like, Trump.
Yeah. I don't know how the hell that happened.
I don't know, man. I really like William though, man. Like William was like willing to like hang out, play a game. I think for him also he was kind of like it was for him it was kind of weird being this like much older guy, right? And we're all these younger guys like, yeah, man, come hang out with us, Yeah, dude, come on, let's play a game.
Yeah, I mean, he
Like
seemed
you,
to
you,
he seemed to get pretty comfortable after a few times, though. I mean,
no, that's what I think though. Like I think he was happy to play a game, and people were just like, yeah, whatever, man, because he was. I don't know. He was like, I like talking to him, and yeah, he messaged me. He messaged me on Board Game Geek about a month ago. It was like, hey man, what's up? I just let him know what's going on.
yeah,
So no, man, I like William, and I get what happened. I mean, God, his fucking wife left him. That was horrible.
yeah, that was pretty
You
bad. I
know?
was there when that happened, and I remember
Yeah,
I
you.
went over to his place because we were gonna play a game, and then before we started playing, he's like, "Yeah, I guess I'll." I actually went out to lunch in the middle of the game, and then when we were at lunch, he just sort of laid it on me.
Damn, man.
Yeah, I'm like, "Holy shit!"
But he's doing relatively okay, man. He's still employed. He said it's really easy since nobody's on campus.
Yeah, I bet that's true. That sounds accurate to me. What's really fucked up about when his wife left him, though, is that he was there because of her. Otherwise, he might have left because he has terrible allergies in Kentucky. Is allergy hell. I mean, I have allergies too, and my allergies got better after I left. And his allergies are way worse than mine, though. So he's got to deal with that. And they own a house together. They still owed money on it. She left him and then gave him the house. So now he's stuck with the house in a state he doesn't want to live in. So the divorce was worse than most because of the context of the whole thing.
That fucking sucks, man.
And then she left him for some business associate who lives in a different state. And I don't know. It's pretty fucked.
Pretty fucked up, man.
Uh,
Yeah, but he was one of those guys who, when the wokeness really hit, I think that's what pushed him towards Trump. Really.
yeah, because he doesn't go for that. He's sort of an old school comedy guy. I remember he would always quote 70s and 80s comedies. And he liked liked fairly incorrect or politically incorrect humor for sure.
Oh, definitely. But also just very much a class guy, of course.
Yes.
And like I always say, like the degree to which wokeness will be persuasive to you as a white person is dependent upon your paycheck.
Yeah, I
You
think that's
know,
true.
if you're not making a lot of money and they're like white privilege, you're like, I don't get it.
Yeah,
Sorry,
well, I
kids.
flip burgers 10 hours a day, so it hasn't helped me any. So it must be bullshit.
Yeah, exactly, man. So, anyways,
Oh, we got another super chat, by the way, from
what do we got?
Diogenes. $5. Thank you, sir. He said,
Yeah, thanks, man.
what moral theories do y'all subscribe to? And if not, what's your opinion on virtue ethics?
Man, off the top of my head, I got myself. I don't even know exactly what virtue ethics are. What do you think?
Um, I don't really have a moral theory necessarily, at least not a one set in stone. For a long time, I was super interested in Platonism, but not so much now.
What made you go away from Platonism?
The realization that Plato was just trying to justify rule by his rich friends. That's ultimately what the project is. I mean, he's trying to justify rule by aristocrats by saying, okay, we're not ruling because we were born into certain families, but we should rule. The reason for our rule should be that we've spent a lot of time getting educated, and therefore we have virtue. So effectively, sort of like the argument in the neoliberal context of we went to the Ivy League schools because our parents went there, but we went there because we're smart, even though mostly it's because of connections familially, and therefore we should
Yeah,
control everything, and only our people should hold cabinet positions and be represented and get elected to Congress, and the rest of you should fuck off.
that's interesting. Did I ever tell you about when I first read The Republic?
I don't think so.
I actually threw the book across the room that I was
Really?
in. Yeah, I had a very visceral, deep, negative reaction to Plato when I first read him. Uh, Partially what you said, I thought it was an excuse for aristocrats, and I also felt like it was a dodge. Like, for instance, the might makes right argument that's made at the beginning of the Republic, I felt was actually never answered. So I was reading Plato, I was like, you didn't actually answer it. You didn't answer what is Thrasymachus, right? Am I
Uh,
saying his name right?
Thrasymachus, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, you didn't answer the question. You just sidestepped it because when he says that, I'm like, yeah, that is pertinent. Because in my mind, I'm like, yeah, might does make right. If you have the ability to force your will on things, then it will be forced. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily like the good thing. I'm just saying that is. I believe that is the way that the world works for the most part. And so I'm like, if you're going to debate that that's not the way the world works, Plato puts up one fucking weak debate. And I remember I hit the book on the spine of the fucking table. I read, I was in chapter 2, and I was like, this guy's a fucking idiot. And it's the only book I've ever thrown across the room in my life. All right. But I finished it. I read the whole Republic, and I was like, this guy's a jackass. Like, I did not like him, man. I was way more for Aristotle when I read him. You know. Uh, but that being said, I'm not saying there's not interesting things in Plato, of course. I just think that for me, I had a very strong visceral reaction at that moment. And I remembered I wrote my friend Jonathan an email, who at that time he was really into Nietzsche, and we would debate some philosophical stuff. I remember what I told him was, if this is the basis of Western thought, we're fucked. Like, if this is the wellspring, we're fucked.
Yeah,
But go ahead.
I don't know. In general, I find that my philosophical ideas are fairly eclectic. I've never really
Yeah,
read a book and agreed with everything in it. I've never had that experience.
yeah. I can't really think of much of anything. Maybe the Tao Te Ching.
I
I've
don't
read
even know
that
if I've ever
several
written
times.
anything that I fully agree with. At least not within like a week of writing it. But
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it counts as a moral theory necessarily, but I've always admired Taoism, and I've got a few books on it. And yeah, I like Taoism a lot.
did I ever
That's
tell you that?
probably that's probably the thing I agree with the most.
Did I ever tell you that time you were thinking about stopping by when my family still lived in North Carolina, and I told my mom about you, and then she said something about, well, what does he believe, or I don't remember what the fuck. And I said, well, I think he's in the Taoism. And then later on, I think he already canceled the trip anyway. But then she said, is that guy still coming? And I said no, and then she said, well, good, because I wouldn't have allowed him to stay anyway, being like a Muslim or whatever the fuck he was.
Hey, Diogenes. Beyond the fact that I'm a big fan of the philosopher Diogenes, I'm inspired. I haven't actually read a Taoist book in a year or two. I'm gonna read some more Taoist books. Probably gonna need it with the year coming up, right?
Yeah,
I mean, come on. There's 10 million fewer jobs in America than there were a year ago. 10 million fewer. We're in a deep, deep depression, kids.
yeah, things suck.
Let's go read The Grapes of Wrath.
Yeah, shit sucks.
Well, what does he say in Full Metal Jacket? It's a huge shit sandwich. And we all got to take a bite.
Sounds about right. Sounds like the quote of the evening.
Hmm.
Oh, Speedy
Yeah.
Sphincter, glad to see you. You still need to send me your mailing address. Yeah.
Also, Diogenes, thank you for, I got to say real quick, not super chat, but thank you for, what the fuck? Have you not thought out these things? Solid foundations for your political morals. Um, thank you for the, thank you for the pointed comment.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I guess the longer I've lived, the more I've become skeptical of theoretical models really encapsulating lived reality or capturing lived experience evenly. I mean, for the most part, at this point, I actually sort of laugh scoffingly anytime I hear somebody try to do an inspirational quote. And I just think of them as fools automatically if I hear them do that. And the
I can
idea
see
that
that.
one little sentence can sum up a life philosophy or whatever, to me, it's just laughably stupid. And I can't take it seriously.
Well, that's if you get into that. I mean, if you're getting to something more systematic, I do get what you're saying, though. The only time I'm okay with those is if I'm reading some Civil War thing and, somebody's trying to, like, inspire their troops,
Yeah.
right? Men, remember you are, like, I was reading one today from Shiloh. What was it? General Tuttle was riding by his lines, and he said, "Men, remember, today you are Iowa boys." And it sounds kind of silly and ridiculous in a way, right? But it means something. They're from Iowa.
Yeah, and also this is
he's
how
trying to say, like,
the charge of the
remember,
7th Iowa.
To represent your state, your community. You're right. The 7th Iowa, that was the unit. Was it the 7th, 12th, and 14th Iowa, and the 2nd Iowa? Those are the 4 regiments in his brigade. And he's trying to be like, remember you're from Iowa. Remember your community. Remember your people. So it's a simple line, but what's Tuttle supposed to do? Like, get off his fucking horse and be like, I want to give you all a philosophical justification for why you should be proud to be from Iowa. First off, we're the Hawkeye state. It doesn't work that way.
How about, gentlemen, in Plato's Phaedrus 1342, section C, down to 1343, section B, the speaker Phaedrus, the secondary speaker, says that we must follow our soul charioteer to our highest and best destiny. And then he gets shot through the throat by a sniper.
Yeah. No, I would say that to answer the question, I was thinking in terms of politics. I have been partial to John Locke, and I don't agree with Rousseau. I'm always have an interesting relationship with because I've always found Rousseau a dynamic and interesting thinker, and somebody like I can agree with and disagree with as well. But I will say, ultimately, I'm a Machiavellian, really. And I'm more interested in the way that the world actually works than the justifications people make up for how the world works. But also keeping in mind the fact as well that Machiavelli was not actually supporting an oppressive government.
Yeah.
He was supporting what he considered good government, and specifically republics. His admiration for Rome. The discourses on Livy, of course. So, I ultimately, if you're talking about like a political morality, I'm with Machiavelli.
Yeah. I'm trying to think who would be the thinker who best sort of encapsulates. You can't really count him as a philosopher, but actually the person who I've warmed to the most over the years is probably Herodotus.
Yeah, I've noticed that, man, because, I mean, not that you disliked Herodotus, but you were more of a Theodosies guy when I first met you. You liked Herodotus, but over time you've been more like, yeah, Herodotus is a great read, I mean, there's giants.
Well, the thing about Herodotus is that there is a lot of analytical depth there, but he also wants to really engage his readers. And he definitely tries to promote his own sort of moral vision, however it might be laid out. I mean, clearly characters in Herodotus are expected to exhibit a certain amount of wisdom and a certain amount of balance. They're expected to have to think out the consequences of their actions. So, and also he is sort of aware of the importance of custom and tradition in terms of how it shapes people's mental universes and how different people view the world differently because of how they're raised. So he has sort of a general understanding of how people work, which I think it would make him able to blend today. Because a lot of people in the past, if you put them in today's context, I don't think they'd be able to get along very well. But Herodotus is someone who I think can put himself in your shoes and kind of see the world from your eyes, and I think he would do very well in today's world.
I can see that based on my admittedly limited readings to understand Herodotus. I did pick up on the last part you said about him understanding customs and traditions, and in that regard, having a more flexible mind as opposed to how does a Greek see this, but like trying to see things from the points of view. Uh, I also would add to that. And I got a question too about Herodotus for you, but I do want to add that I also think that Plutarch would blend relatively well. And I say that because, and Plutarch's probably the ancient historian I've read the most because I am a big fan of his, but because he's presenting a personalized story. And I would also say that when Plutarch's writing about, say, you've got your Marius versus Sulla or whatever the rest is, I don't feel like he's taking, I don't know, how can I put this to words, man? Like, I think he's trying to present the story of this person from their point of view. And of course, he has his own opinions about them that he puts in there, naturally.
Yeah.
But you are getting a personalized view of this person's interactions, personalized explanations for why they did what they did. And I think all of that would blend relatively well with today. You know, and it's not like he's writing these histories to like extol like the virtues of Romans, but to discuss what was the life and course of Gaius Marius or Sertorius, which is one of his best pieces of work, I think.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, so I think Plutarch would blend relatively well today too. Maybe not as well as Herodotus, but I think he'd blend pretty well.
Yeah, I think Plutarch would be semi-mainstream, and I think the reason he would make it, though, is because he's very readable. And he'd also be very widely read, because he was a guy who was obsessed with keeping his own personal library. And it's also possible because of how he lived in his own time, where he was this local grandee in the small little town of Chaeronea, that he would live in some small historical town in the middle of nowhere, and just be sort of this local patron saint type of figure. And, be locally famous for charity and also write a bunch of books of local history. And then write some stuff of national importance as well. And just have a huge bibliography by the end of his life. That was kind of how he lived his life back then. I think that would actually still work, provided that he was born rich.
Yeah, I've always thought that somebody should try to, for fun, write like American political biographies in the style of Plutarch, yeah. With the bullet points and everything.
Now, I'd love to see the one of Trump.
I'd want to see the one of Andrew Jackson and Jefferson Davis. Those are two I'd want to see. Plutarch, the life of Jefferson Davis. I'd want to read that.
That could be fun. Actually, maybe you should do that as a side project,
Oh, God. But wait. Herodotus, though, like, what is his moral vision, or world, if you will, that you mentioned earlier?
His moral vision seems to be that freedom and people who enjoy it are more creative and brave than people who rely upon someone else for guidance or for leadership. So when he talks about the Athenians achieving democracy, you can tell that he's very much a partisan of the democratic system. He talks about how suddenly Athenian armies started winning more battles, and how their enemies noticed that the Athenians were more motivated and that they were harder to move from the field. And then he compares that with, say, the Persians in the Persian War. He talks about how the Athenians win the Battle of Marathon. The Persians are kind of freaked out. He talks about how how the various Persian forces at Salamis kind of lose their nerve. And even the Greeks there, who aren't as motivated because they're not fighting for freedom, don't fight as well as the Greeks who are fighting for freedom. So he's very much a believer in freedom and the power of freedom to motivate. And he sort of blends or blurs the line between people who are actually living in a democracy and then people who are just on the same side as the Athenians, such as the Spartans, who are not really a free people. So it's an interesting dynamic, but it's very consistent.
Yeah.
And
I think there's a lot of truth in that, though. But I mean, granted, it isn't. I would only add this, though. You would have to be fighting for a democracy you believe in. So let's say you have a country that says it's a democracy, but they're really not. I
yeah,
could see your army's going to fight like absolute shit. You know, which we've seen in history. You got lots of democracies and republics that their armies have done poorly, and I find a lot of times when I've read about those, it's because the people have been like, "This thing's a sham. Who cares?" You
yeah.
know.
And that's true. Although because of direct participation in ancient democracy, there weren't too many people who felt that way. Because, I mean, it was hard to get away with corruption back then. Everything was out in the open. Even the treasury would be at the temple on the top of the hill. The Athenian treasury was at the Temple of Athena. You could literally go and see how much money's there. No one could stop you
Whoa,
from visiting. I mean, there
that's
aren't
kind of
really too
cool.
many secrets, you know?
I mean, were there guards at the treasury to make sure you
Well,
didn't
I'm sure there
steal
were
it? Of
guards,
course.
but there aren't really that many state secrets in the sense that there's no possibility of anybody peddling a conspiracy about the deep state because the people meet and make decisions. I mean,
Well, it's
there's
interesting you say that because America, in many ways, is founded. America, in many ways, is founded on a conspiracy theory. The founders had very conspiratorial thinking. They believed the British Parliament was in a conspiracy to deprive them of their rights and to subject them and make them, some that would say slaves, of course, but whatever statement they want, right?
yeah,
And that kind of paranoia, there was a little period in time in the 70s and 80s where it became popular to say that the American Revolution had started over mass paranoia. And Gordon Wood really blew that up when he wrote an article where he said, well, conspiratorial thinking was normal back then. You know, to believe in conspiracy theories was considered common. But it is true, though. The American revolutionaries believed in some conspiracies that weren't happening. They just weren't. But I like what that one guy said. Was it Peter Hitchens said that he doesn't believe in conspiracy theories, but he believes in lunch. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like they don't get in a smoky room and say like we're gonna do this and that, but they do have lunch and agree on some shit, and it may or may not happen. But but yeah, so that would mean like did you have conspiratorial thinking in Rome really or not or not?
sort of. I mean, clearly, there were times where people would think that something was rigged because they knew that groups of elites would get together and join forces to win elections. That being said, mostly this was just kind of accepted as how things were done. So I guess these conspiracies were seen as legitimate mostly. Although they definitely were conspiracies. So maybe not in the
Okay.
modern sense of it being some nefarious scheme, but in terms of people talking about actual conspiracies, then I think, yeah, that people kind of accepted that happened. And then there were also rumors of people plotting to destroy stuff.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Well, the conspiracy of Catiline, of course, written about by Sallust and a few others.
yeah.
How reliable do you think our sources are on that? What's your gut feeling?
Our main source from the time is actually Cicero, who, of course, was trying to prosecute them.
Yeah.
And he basically put his whole reputation on the line to do so. And then Sallust writes about 30 years later. Um, oh my god. I actually have some skepticism about how legitimate the conspiracy of Catiline was. I don't know for sure. I mean, they definitely were planning something. But
Wait, so, but you don't buy the part in Salist where they drink children's blood to bond themselves together?
no, I don't think they did that. I also don't think that they planned to burn down most of the city. Because basically, that contradicts the motive that they supposedly have, right? Because the motive that is ascribed to them by both Cicero and Sallust is that these are deeply indebted senators who have lost a bunch of elections and need to repay their debtors, and also want to have the honor of holding office. They feel like they got cheated. In the case of someone like Lentulus Sura, he wants to regain his status that he lost.
Mm-hmm.
So I doubt they'd want to burn down the city, because if they got caught doing that, then what that would lead to is the recall of Pompey. And Pompey always took all the credit for himself. There's no fucking way that he would have shared it with any of them. Not only that, but if they got caught burning stuff, this was considered the ultimate sacrilege. And it would have turned all the people against them, even people who might have otherwise been somewhat neutral or favorable. So I believe that the parts about burning were actually created by Cicero out of thin air, just to smear them. I do think it's possible they may have planned a few murders, but I don't think it went much beyond that. Or it might have been
like, or it might have been they were going to burn like one or two buildings, right? But then you're like, they're going to burn the whole fucking city, you know?
Yeah, and it's also possible that the people they were gathering in the north, that army of sullen veterans and indebted farmers, it's possible they were just trying to get together voters and bring them to Rome as a bloc. Gotcha. And then it was misconstrued as an army. But granted that a lot of them had arms, it probably was an army, but there is a chance it wasn't. But once Cicero put all of his cards into that, once he really staked his entire reputation and career on that, he had no choice but to just press forward and try to convict all of them. And that's ultimately what he did. And he got another 20 years of prominence out of it.
He did, man. That fucker went like, I feel like if I was around Cicero, like you're hanging out with him, you had lunch, you'd be like, have I ever told you about Catiline? You know?
So yes, yesterday, day before yesterday, twice the day before that. And then he'd be like, Sean, how good is your understanding of meter, Sean? Poetic meter. Because I'm thinking, the thing people really like is epic poetry, and I can think of nothing more epic than the time that I, Rome's humble, brave consul from the year 63, saved the Republic from the evils of Catiline. I know you recall that time, how I bravely stood before the Senate. I think you should put that
in man, I got a question for you, though.
Yeah.
Why do we have this really positive view of Cicero overall? Like, I remember as a kid, I got quoted Cicero back to me, like it was fucking the Book of John or something in a way.
So
you know
what I'm saying is this: Cicero survives in a fairly copious amount, so we have a lot of his writing, and is considered to be the best Latin and the example of Golden Age Latin. So when people would learn Cicero, they were taught this is the best Latin, and they assumed that because he had the best grammar, vocab, word choice, all that he must be really, really wise. And that his views must just be perfect. So basically, when the Founding Fathers were brought up, they were taught Cicero is the standard. This man knows what he's talking about, and his ideas are as good as his grammar and prose style.
Gotcha.
And also, we don't really have too many contradicting opinions, because Cicero was preserved by a lot of monks who thought he was eloquent, even if they didn't really give a shit about republicanism in the Roman sense. They still found him to be enticing, and actually they found him to be something of a guilty pleasure, all the great writing, because they thought that it was somewhat sinful to enjoy good writing because it's so pleasurable. But it was something they kept around. It'd be kind of like if you're treating yourself to getting drunk at the end of the week. Instead, you could read some Cicero, read some good prose.
That's wild, bro. That's wild, man.
Yeah, and that's basically why Cicero has survived to the present and been treated this way. But if you actually study him in context, you realize this man was fairly annoying, actually. He got on the nerves of the people around him. He was a whiny guy. He was very vain. And the people who used him as a political ally did so without trying to hang out with him. So, example, I've mentioned in the past he had a massive man crush on Pompey.
Yeah.
This was completely unrequited. He thought Pompey was one of the greatest Romans to ever live. And he would praise Pompey in his letters. And then later on, when Pompey would kind of ignore him or not give him too much respect, he would then write to his good friend Atticus and say, I don't think Pompey likes me. I'm not one of the cool kids. But then when Pompey would say hello, and Pompey would say, Cicero, you're a great speaker. I'm really proud that you're standing with us on this issue. He would write to Atticus preening, Pompey's my good friend. We like each other. It's the classic example of a man crush.
Oh God, what a simp!
No, it's pretty sad. Cicero was desperate for Pompey's attention, and he also had a weird relationship with Caesar. Caesar was actually willing to be friends with Cicero for real, but Caesar had some different political ideas. But Cicero was not interested in Caesar for some reason. He just didn't really like him or trust him. He trusted Pompey, even though Pompey kept fucking him over, but he didn't trust Caesar. Go figure.
Well, I felt like Cicero was really trying to get in with the Optimates.
He was.
You know?
Yeah. He always wanted to be one of them, even though at a certain point he had to realize he would never be accepted by them, because one of their most prominent members, Cato, would mock him in public all the time for his heritage and his new man status. So he's constantly being mocked by a guy who is the unofficial leader of that faction, and he thinks that he's going to be accepted by all of them at some point just because. Because he doesn't realize this is not a club you get into. You're either born into it or you're not. That's it. No matter what you do for them, they will always regard you as lesser than. And it's also a weird dynamic, because we're talking about people who are distinguishing between very, very, very minor class distinctions at the very pinnacle of Roman society. I mean, these are terribly small differences that more humble people would not have recognized as being a thing. They would not have given a fuck about or understood. Yeah.
What do you think of the depiction of Cicero in Rome, the HBO show?
It's not that detailed. I mean, he didn't really feature that prominently.
No, he wasn't one of the main characters. I did like him in the show because I feel weird about Cicero, because all the stuff you're saying, of course, is true, right?
Yeah.
But I also kind of like the guy, too, at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of a smartass. I mean, he says some funny shit, but he also doesn't have a lot of filter, so he's not very selective about who he dunks on. And that got him in trouble a lot.
That's what I mean. I think that's what I find interesting about him, is that he's living this time of a civil wars, and people choosing sides, and he's in some ways the ultimate middleman.
Yeah, to an extent.
He's not quite firmly in either camp, necessarily.
Because he wants to be an Optimate, but he can't because he doesn't have the pedigree. But he can't be a Popularis because he doesn't respect them and he thinks that they're lesser than. Although he knows that by birth he's basically forced to be sort of like them. And I think he's weirded out by Caesar on a certain level, because Caesar has the pedigree he's always wanted. And if he were Caesar, he would definitely be an Optimate.
But of course, Caesar's like, nah, fuck that, man.
Yeah, Caesar sees that he's the nephew of Marius. Marius is sort of the founder of the Populares in many ways.
Not the Gracchi?
I mean, the Gracchi, I guess, in terms of inspiration, yeah, but in terms of being an actual faction, I'm not sure exactly when it would have started, but Marius becomes sort of the new figure after his time, and Caesar's the guy who takes up the mantle of Marius, because Marius' faction's officially dismantled by Sulla, but he didn't kill the voters who supported Marius. So Caesar's still able to tap into that.
You need to do a Gaius Marius versus Sulla video, man.
Yeah, I will eventually. I'm thinking about doing more lecture-style videos on Roman history, going through the history of the Republic especially.
But I mean, breaking down the stakes and everything, and the personalities. I mean, Of course, those two figures and a variety of other ones are always floating around the other videos you do about these other Romans who are not as well known but are very important, as you make clear in just about every video. But I think that'd be a good one. But of course, the one I really want to see is Crisis of the Third Century.
Yeah, I think at some point for one of these we need to do a tier ranking list, maybe by either decade or era for some Roman era politicians, and then rank them sort of on the totality of political and military skill, because I think those two things aren't really separable in Rome. Because you can be good at one and not the other, but you kind of have to have both, or you're pretty much fucked.
That makes perfect sense, man. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. They are political generals overtly, of course.
Yeah, I mean, they all are. And most of them don't really have any more or less experience or formal qualification than anyone else. They're all about equally qualified on paper.
In terms of Romans, I can comfortably rate Second Punic War Roman commanders, and I'm pretty good on late Republic stuff. You know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's other periods that I'm just like, I don't fucking know. I mean, I know like kind of vaguely who was in charge, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I could definitely do a tier ranking for sure on Second Punic War Roman commanders for sure.
That sounds like a good one. We'll have to do that sometime soon. Second Punic War.
Yeah. All right. Well, in that case, I got to go crack out the board game Hannibal Rome versus Carthage sometime soon. Okay.
Yeah, so you can look at your favorite general, Tiberius Sempronius Longus.
You mean Schlongus? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that reminds me. You ever read Lord Byron's thoughts on Nero?
No.
Yeah, he said like well, there's two Neros in Roman history. There's of course the emperor who he's like is disgusting and debased, and then he's like, but then there's the other Nero who won the Battle of the Meteorus River, and he's like, why do we only talk about the failure Nero but not the successful one? It wasn't like a deep
much
thought
about the successful one.
I know that's what you and me are saying, but he had kind of this musing about that. Like, why isn't the other Nero more celebrated? I mean, God damn it, he won the decisive battle of the Second Punic War, right?
Yeah, he did. I think
he did indeed, man.
Been one of the first men of that young generation to come up and start kicking ass, because for a while they were just recycling the same guys year after year, and then this guy was way younger, probably only in his early 30s or something. And then he ends up winning a monumental victory. And then after that, a bunch of other guys who, by later standards, were technically too young to hold the consulship, held it and kicked a bunch of ass. Including the guy who conquered Greece, Flamininus.
Yeah.
Or not, he didn't conquer it, but he did. He beat.
There's a dramatic moment in the histories where they throw Hasdrubal's head into Hannibal's camp.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, fucking intense. All right, we got a super chat here, man.
From Nerve AMV Maker for $5. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
He said, if Sean likes Machiavelli, he should read The Machiavellians by James Burnham.
Yeah, it's on the to-read list. Thank you. I have become a lot more interested in what is termed elite theory. I've been more interested in that over the last year or so. But I have yet to dive into it. I'm still reading through my father's books that I inherited, you know, like which ones to keep and which ones not to and whatnot. So it'll take me a minute, but it's on the to-read list for sure. I am interested in that. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nerve AMV Maker.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. I'm trying to think. What's another group of Romans who would be fairly easy to compare to one another? I feel like the Romans of the 60s would make a good comparative video. Because at that point you don't have the triumvirate yet as having a stranglehold on Roman politics. And at that point also the Sullan faction has lost its control, so it's a decade where things are fairly evenly balanced except for the extreme amount of power that Pompey has. But he's mostly not at Rome.
What were the big events of the 60s?
Well, you have the Mithridatic Wars, or some of them. I think the
Okay.
Third Mithridatic War. The Revolt of Spartacus happens. Wait, no. That's a little. That's late 71, so that's already over by this point. Um, you have the Conspiracy of Catiline in 63.
Okay.
There is. I mean, a lot of it is just. There's a lot of interesting politics back at Rome. And Rome is still expanding. Pompey not only conquers Mithridates after taking over from Lucullus, but then he goes and annexes a bunch of stuff in Syria and Judea as well.
I was gonna say, I think that's when they took Judea.
Yeah,
You know.
and I don't remember exactly when Pompey's pirate command was, but that was either in the early 60s or very late 70s.
Oh, the pirate command was definitely like pre. That was definitely before he went to Judea.
Yeah, so that's probably very
Yeah.
early 60s. Anyway, it's an interesting decade because you always have the shadow of Pompey, but he's never quite there. And then you have a lot of other politicians jockeying for position.
I see what you mean. So it's kind of this interregnum period, right? This intermittent in between time, if you will.
Yeah, and a lot of it is because the senators managed to solidify a fairly effective anti-Pompey group. Pompey had to turn to other allies to get his way. So effectively, the people who tried to oppose him created the first triumvirate. Otherwise, Pompey would have had to tell his veterans, hey, sorry, unlike every other people who have served under the Roman flag, none of you get shit. You all go homeless now. Okay, bye. So, I mean, yeah, of course that's what's going to happen.
Oh God. How of course Crassus had helped crush Spartacus. What was he up to in the 60s?
Crassus, so he had been involved with Spartacus, as you mentioned. He is one of the guys trying to figure out how to stop Pompey. So he is sort of playing a popularis, actually, even though he is a slumlord at the same time. And people die because his buildings collapse. But at the same time, he's posing as a champion of the poor. And he does host some public feasts at times and stuff. So I've heard some people try to compare him to Trump. That's just dumb. There are some superficial similarities between the two, but it ends there. Crassus was very charming. He was a pretty damn good speaker. Remember, his grandpa was the famous orator, Crassus. And he, in general, tried to use the power of money and local largesse to get his way. And he also had Caesar as an ally. So he cultivated the friendship of Caesar because he saw that Caesar was charismatic and capable. So a lot of men who had ambition but not a lot of money went to Crassus to get funded. And he was willing to do it because he wanted people to know that he was responsible for these capable men getting into power.
Gotcha.
So that was sort of his general dynamic at the time. And he also was trying to get credit for the Spartacus revolt because Pompey actually crushed a handful of the people who fled from the last battle, and then people thought that he won the whole thing. So Crassus was really fucking pissed off about that. As
you said, Pompey takes all the credit wherever he goes, right?
Yes. Pompey takes all the credit for everything, no matter what. And he's actually effective at it. People love Pompey at this time. He had been consistently winning battles for Rome. The only person who had really exposed him was Sertorius. Sertorius exposed him tactically.
Yeah.
Because Pompey's a great strategist, but he was never that great of a tactician.
Yes, exactly. Yes, very good strategist. I mean, fuck, he had Caesar on the ropes until the Senate forced him to go fight fucking what was that battle? One in Greece.
Pharsalus. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pompey was a brilliant strategist and organizer. I mean, in those qualities, he's S tier. But then tactically, he's pretty average. He's just kind of there.
Yeah.
So that it was something that only Caesar and Sertorius were able to expose, though. Other than that, Pompey just had an unbroken string of victory and success until he tried to go back to Rome and do regular politics. Because he actually wasn't a very good speaker, and he also wasn't very politically savvy for the most part. He just kind of got outmaneuvered until he literally formed the first triumvirate. And then most of the decision making there was by Caesar and Crassus. And then Pompey could never figure out how to control Clodius when he went rogue.
Wait, so when did Clodius go rogue?
Pretty early on, after Caesar left to go take command in Gaul, he just kind of started doing his own thing. And Pompey and Crassus weren't able to really rein it in. And then Milo was basically the rival gang leader. And it was just a whole clusterfuck in the 50s.
What was Clodius up to? I know he gets mentioned in the Gallic War. And I know that he was kind of like this political gang leader, if you will. But you say, like, go rogue. I didn't know that was the case necessarily.
So, at
like,
first, the plan was for him to hold the tribuneship, because the triumvirate needed somebody in that office because it was powerful, but they didn't really have a great candidate. So, a guy named Claudius, who was a patrician, decided to go plebeian so he'd be eligible. So, he gave up his patrician status, took the name Clodius, and then took up the office to use it on behalf of the triumvirate. But then as soon as he got in, he decided to do some other shit.
Mm.
And, things got progressively worse from there. And it ended up with a lot of street violence. And he kind of stopped paying attention to what the triumvirs were saying, got really accustomed to his own power. When he eventually does die, his followers are so pissed off that they burn down the Senate house and uses a funeral pyre for him.
Holy shit.
Yeah, no, he had a hardcore following. Clodius was wildly charismatic. And apparently his sister was too, Clodia, because she inspired the Roman poet Catullus, who fell in love with her and wrote a bunch of poems about her.
All right, man. God, I gotta hear more about Clodius now. I mean, I just thought he was just some asshole gang leader, but holy shit, fucking burning down the Senate house, make a funeral pyre for him? Holy fuck.
No, this guy was a rock star. It's actually pretty amazing. Vaza has a super chat for $2. Thank you, Vaza. He says, how much of an a-hole was Octavian? I don't know if he's really that much more of an a-hole than anybody else back then. The only reason I point out his crimes and all the bloodshed when I talk about him is because a lot of people think of him as this kindly old man who established peace, which is true, but he got there through a path of blood. He was just as bloodthirsty, if not more so, than most of his contemporaries. The difference is not so much that he was worse, it's just he was better at it. He was better at manipulation, and he also had a really good military commander in his best friend Agrippa. So between those things, he was able to rise to power.
I also feel that his killing of other people, of course, was to enhance his power, but I believe he also had a commitment to trying to make the government at large more stable.
I think there's that, too. I think he actually was fairly responsible. That being said, he started out as sort of a popular leader, but in the end, the government he established was very much more in the old Senate tradition of the powerful supporting each other. And kind of this elite rule, both at home and abroad. So, in many ways, although the Caesarian faction ultimately triumphed, a lot of the values of the senatorial faction ended up being implemented. And that actually leads us to the next super chat. Aliaga, for $5, thank you, ask, exactly how was Octavian able to control the levers of government without the public realizing that he was actually an emperor? So,
great question.
Yeah, a couple of things here. Most of the common people were not that concerned with liberty, or libertas as the Romans would have thought of it. This was very much an elite concern. The idea that the Senate had control was important to people who were in the Senate. Common Romans didn't really give a shit about the Senate. They thought the Senate was somewhat opposed to their interest, and that's why many of them had backed Clodius when they did and burned the Senate house to the ground. So, Octavian was mostly putting on the show for the benefit of the elites, because he knew that if you offend the honor of the elites, you usually get a dagger in your back within days. The elites cannot have their precious honor violated, or they start getting stabby. So the way he was able to do this, a couple of things he was able to do. One is that the Senate got depleted by the Civil Wars, partly due to the proscriptions that he had took a part in, but also just due to events beyond his control. So Octavian was then able to appoint a bunch of replacement senators, which means that a whole lot of people in the Senate owed their position to him and were loyal to him personally. So he could kind of do what he wanted. The other thing to keep in mind is that the Romans had always had an ideology of meritocracy, where the offices that you hold, that you're elected to, are kind of badges of honor or proof of accomplishment. And it means that you got there because you are capable. So Octavian, by this point, has amassed more offices and honors than anybody else. So he's able to argue, I am the most capable and accomplished person in the Senate. So what I say should be taken most seriously. And also, ever since I took over, guess what? How many people have been killed? Comparatively. How many major battles have been fought where Romans have slaughtered each other? How many veterans, by contrast, have been settled in Gaul and gotten their own farms? You know this is for the best. That's basically his appeal. But in terms of how he actually does it while maintaining the forms of the Republic, he uses suggestion. So, for instance, what he does is he'll have meetings at his house where he meets with the people around him, and he basically says he consults them and then tells them what he wants. So, the way he shows his favor is then he'll be seen with people in public and he'll hang out with them. So people know, oh, Octavian and this guy are friends. And so then if you see that guy after talking with Octavian all smiles and then go up to the podium and propose a law, you vote for it because you know that Octavian is for this. But you don't feel compelled to. You just decide to do it. And there's no compulsion. And actually there are people who still oppose Octavian in the Senate and still have careers because he divides the imperial system. You have some provinces that are imperial, the ones that have legions basically, and some that are senatorial, which mostly don't have troops. You can be a successful politician just saying, fuck Octavian. But then you get commands that don't really matter. So you're consigning yourself to the sidelines, but he's not going to go after you unless you actually pose a real threat.
Yeah, that reminds me of, you say that? That reminds me of Putin in Russia, because, I mean, there are opposition parties and media outlets.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go to Russia and read anti-Putin newspapers, but, it's, we all know if they ever got really serious, I mean, he'd be cracking down, right?
Oh, yeah. No, United Russia has a pretty good stranglehold going. It's also interesting, he even appoints some people to be ambassadors. So I remember Michael was talking about how the Russian ambassador to whatever country he was working in, he met with the guy and said, I have to be honest, I think Putin sucks. And the guy said, so do I.
Estonia. He was in Estonia.
Yeah, Estonia. Yeah, there you go. So anyway...
Of course...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you're anti-Putin, so you get to be ambassador of Estonia. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what it is.
So, Octavian's whole thing was effectively subtlety. It was just, everybody kind of knew who's in charge, but he didn't wear it on his sleeve. He never wore a crown. He didn't have robes. There was no throne. And anytime he wanted someone to take up after him, what he would do is make sure that they got a bunch of honors. So that way they would be the second most accomplished person, even if this person's 16 years old or whatever. So this became a tradition where princes from the Julio-Claudian family would start holding consulships at the age of 14, 15, 16 years old. So say if Trump were emperor, he would have his son Baron holding consulships and stuff like that.
Ah, Baron.
So that way, if you couldn't legitimately say that Baron wasn't accomplished. The man's held a consulship. Sure, he's a kid, but what are you gonna do? He's held the highest honor in Rome. How many other people can say that? And then he's also held a bunch of other offices that he was awarded. So he's got the most accomplishments. He technically has the most experience. He has more auctoritas than anybody else. Even some random 80-year-old senator who's been around and seen some stuff. So that was kind of the basic idea of the Principate. is to regulate the honors of everyone else, make sure that the members of the family are on a whole different plane than everybody else. And then friends of the family are a little bit below that. And the people who are opposed to you, they can have a decently successful career, but they're always going to be limited. And then you can have people who are sort of in your outer circle who do pretty well, maybe hold a consulship or two or whatever. And then you make sure that the only people who get to command troops are people you know personally and trust. That way they won't rebel.
Yeah.
And that's how he held control. And also he paid the legions directly because he controlled Egypt as his personal estate. That was a key part of Augustus' arrangement.
Oh yeah, gotta control Egypt, man. That's where the grain's coming.
He's got his own treasury, because actually most of the grain at this time was still coming from what's now Tunisia, but a lot of money was coming out of Egypt.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was absolutely key.
It's one of the last things I want to mention for tonight when you were talking about Augustus. I mean, you're saying like in many ways his program is more optimate than popularis, of course, right?
In the end, it kind of is. Although he does institute grain subsidies, which were somewhat popularis. So people do often receive benefits for living in the city, and he tries to keep down urban unrest to make sure they're entertained and everything. Voting becomes very much sort of just this blasé thing because all the elections are predetermined. He determines the winners of a lot of races, not all of them, but many, the ones that matter. So it's very much stage managed. If you were just looking, you would see elections, but people didn't really give a shit because people kind of understood they didn't matter. But for the elites, this was still a custom that they were very proud of. Even though they knew it was kind of a sham, they still loved going through it because it put them in touch with their ancestors and predecessors. And actually, by this point, it's mostly predecessors more than ancestors because of how many families had died off. So this was just their way of, I guess, play acting. It was just kind of for their benefit. It's just this nice ritual they enjoyed doing. But it
and
didn't
also,
mean
I
that
would.
much. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was gonna say I would imagine because of their you saying that he didn't do it to every election, they could still be like, well, this election's being fairly done, right?
Yeah, I'd be like, well, in this election, I won because the people who voted thought I was great. There's that, but also they thought that legitimacy stemmed from the process of government. And I think Augustus and a lot of the senators believed that you can produce legitimacy even in a rigged system so long as you follow the forms. I think that might be related to Roman religion, where it's more about practice than belief. Where as long as you pour out the potion and say the thing in Latin, it doesn't matter if you think this is stupid or you think this is true. As long as you go through the motions, it's good enough. It's legit.
Yeah.
So I think there might be a connection there. And that was kind of how the system worked.
Interesting. Now, I mentioned that thing about the revolution. I mean, not the revolution, but in this case, Augustus doing things that are very much more optimate, and it sort of reminds me of the Tocqueville argument that the French Revolution, in many ways, simply did what the Bourbons always wanted to do, or were trying to do, by the fact that they could levy heavier taxes, raise more troops, have better troops, if you will.
Yeah.
And just the general centralization of the French government was stuff the Bourbons were trying to do for a while. You know?
Right.
Yeah, so no, so I can definitely see that. It's kind of like the bitter pill of those kind of things, right? Like our side won, but somehow the other side gets this sort of stuff because of, which,
Yeah,
I mean,
I
we
guess
could get more into the deep reasons for that. De Tocqueville would say that the Bourbon project was kind of baked into the cake. And also, if you're going to be fighting a war against other countries, especially if you're like, let's go fight a war against Piedmont, Spain, Austria, Prussia, Britain, and the Netherlands all at once, right?
Yeah.
Then you'd better have a much more centralized and efficient government. Otherwise, the weight of the opponent you're facing will crush you.
Yeah.
Well, anyway.
What are we gonna do for next week?
What's up?
What are we gonna do for next week?
I'm sorry, you cut out just a sec.
Oh,
What'd you say?
sorry, I said, what are we going to do for next week?
I don't know, man. You got any ideas? We could talk about the Biden inauguration.
Yeah, I guess the inauguration is now going to be an actual event with actual drama, so that's interesting.
Yes, everybody, stay tuned.
I mean, I guess we could maybe do the cabinet next week. Or wait, when will the cabinet actually all take their place?
Well, that takes a few weeks. They got to go through the Senate process. They got to go through the confirmation process, right?
Yeah, let's wait till they're all actually confirmed. That way we don't talk about somebody who doesn't make it, because that would be a waste of time.
Yeah. No, good call on that one. I mean, but no, I'm pretty open to anything. I know in a few weeks we're going to do those failed assassination attempts, and I've got Buckingham and we're going to do the successful ones and the failed ones. And for the failed one, I've got Buckingham. For successful, I'm doing Garfield for sure.
I'm not sure which ones I'll do yet, but I have some options written down. Yeah, for next week, maybe. How long would it take you to get ready for the Second Punic War one?
Not terribly long. My problem I ran into today was, you had the Saints playing the divisional game, and this is maybe Drew Brees' last season, and I don't watch football as much as I used to. I used to watch it a lot. But I was like, hey, I made a point to watch every playoff game the Saints were in this year. So that's why I couldn't do as much research as I would have liked to, and why I was late coming in, because, I mean, everybody was pretty fucking depressed. I mean, 3 interceptions that's bad. I don't think I've ever seen Drew Brees look that bad on the sidelines. I mean he really looked like he was about to. What's up?
Is just getting old, or like how? What's the deal?
He's over 40, man. It looked like he was about to cry on the sidelines, and I'm like, I kind of would too, especially if he knows that. If he knows for sure this is his last game as a Saint, this is a bad way to end it. Getting fucking like humiliated out there. Although I won't lie, I did pick the Buccaneers to win, but I wanted to be proven wrong. So anyway, that's why I was late and all the rest. But you want to do Second Punic War tier list? Yeah, I can definitely do that.
Yeah, I think that would be fun.
All I need you to do is send me a list of all the commanders that you want to do. Some I know better than others, but of course, I'm mostly going to defer to you.
Okay.
Because you'll know them in more detail than I will. But yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah, because as soon as you mentioned that, I was thinking for next week, fuck yeah, Second Punic War. That's the ticket.
Hey man, it's the greatest war in the ancient world, right?
Maybe. I think if we knew more about it, the First Punic War actually might be more interesting, but I guess we just don't know quite enough.
The First Punic War is interesting. The only problem with the First Punic War is it doesn't have quite so many dramatic land battles,
Yeah.
Like the second one, Sorry, Hannibal comes over the Alps, blow one army up at Trebia, blow another one at Lake Trasimene, where a fucking earthquake hit in the middle of the fighting. Then the mother of all fucking battles, Cannae, which I think is still, in terms of warfare, the bloodiest day in history.
Yeah, it could be. It's got to be damn close.
Yeah, I mean, don't be wrong. The Battle of the Somme gave it a run for its money, but I think Cannae is still bloodier than the first day of Somme, I think.
There's a big difference between butchering people with a machine gun at 50 or 100 yards and having to butcher them in close quarters with the short sword that's, 18 to 24 inches long.
Yeah, God, fuck. So, I mean, I'm not saying the First Punic War is definitely interesting. I'm just saying it doesn't have the same kind of drama. It doesn't have those, like, dramatic land battles. That's a big deal,
Yeah.
Although, I mean, in terms of ancient warfare, I do like the Suetonius's war in Spain.
Yeah. He's pretty
Yeah.
fascinating.
He is, man. He is, man. You gotta like somebody who's that much of a fucking diehard. They're just, you know,
You know, I remember.
they're leading this
I think when I first
rebellion
met
that
you, you were
probably
asking
can't
me
go
who's the best
anywhere.
Roman general, and I think you said in purely military skill, and I think my answer was Sertorius, and I think you asked me who the hell is that.
Yeah, I did, man. I remember that because I mean, I didn't fucking know.
Yeah, because he made a fool of everyone who ever faced him. I mean, he just made all of them look bad, not just beat them, but made them look bad.
Yeah, God, what a skilled motherfucker, man.
No, he was good.
So yeah, that's Victorious War. The Second Punic War, of course, Alexander invading Persia is another good one in terms of you know fascinating ancient war conflicts. I've always been also very interested in the Gallic War. But anyway, I'll need to call this one a night right now.
All right, I
Uh,
think similar thing
yeah, a
here.
bit tired. I've also been up for a while. I've been up since 6 in the morning, so I should get to sleep.
Yeah. Well, you're gonna go
But
to
hey, thank
sleep.
you.
I'm gonna go play some Yakuza Like a Dragon. So good night, everybody, and thank you for donations and hanging out with us tonight, talking about grad school, books, winter battles, and whatever the fuck else we've talked about. So anyway, good night, everybody.
Night.
All right, we're off the air.